By the time the first waltz began, someone had already written pity into Beatrice Vale's dance card. She did not know it yet. She only knew that the ivory-covered card hanging from her wrist remained empty, pale and polished beneath the candlelight, while the rest of Lady Bramwell's ballroom glittered with names, promises, and careful little victories. London had gathered in silk and satin that evening, in diamonds borrowed from grandmothers and smiles borrowed from ambition. It was Mayfair in the height of the season, and every mother with a daughter to marry had arranged herself like a general before battle. Beatrice stood beside the refreshment table, close enough to be useful if her half-sister required lemonade, far enough from the musicians to avoid being mistaken for someone waiting hopefully. At 29, she had learned the geography of a ballroom better than most girls learned French. The center belonged to the young, the beautiful, and the newly presented. The edges belonged to chaperones, widows, wallflowers, and women whose families had begun to speak of them in lowered voices. Beatrice had occupied every edge in London. She wore a dove-grey gown that had been altered twice and freshened with lace at the sleeves. It was respectable, which in Lady Prudence Vale's vocabulary meant invisible. Her gloves were clean, her dark hair smooth, her posture composed. Nothing about her invited pity except the fact that no gentleman had written his name on her card. That, apparently, was enough. Across the room, Miss Cecily Vale laughed behind her fan as Lord Alastair Fenwick bent over her hand. Cecily was 19, golden-haired, and dressed in pale blue gauze that made her appear almost luminous beneath the chandeliers. Lady Prudence had spent 3 afternoons approving every ribbon on that gown. Beatrice had spent those same afternoons correcting the household accounts, answering invitations, and soothing a dressmaker who had not yet been paid. "Stand a little straighter, Beatrice," Lady Prudence murmured, appearing at her side with the soft step of a woman who never needed to hurry because she expected others to move for her. "You must not look abandoned, even if you are not engaged." Beatrice did not turn her head. "I was not aware I looked abandoned, No, dear. That is often the difficulty." Lady Prudence's smile remained fixed toward the room. To any observer, she might have looked affectionate. One forgets that resignation and dignity can appear much the same in a plain gown. Beatrice folded her gloved hands. She had heard worse. She had heard worse at breakfast, before tea, in carriages, outside fitting rooms, and once while kneeling to pin Cecily's hem. "Cecily looks very well tonight," she said. "Of course she does. She is at the age when looking well still matters." A pause. A little touch of perfume, violets and powder. "You were lovely once, Beatrice." In a quieter way. The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. Cruelty in good society rarely raised its voice. It only ensured the intended person heard clearly. Beatrice looked towards Cecily, who had been joined by 2 young ladies and a gentleman with a weak chin and excellent fortune. Her half-sister's dance card was nearly full. Lady Prudence's gaze followed hers and warmed with satisfaction. "Lord Alastair has asked for the supper dance," she said. "That is not a proposal." "No, but it is a path toward one." Paths matter. A girl must be guided before society decides she has wandered too long. Beatrice felt the old pressure behind her ribs. Not sharp. Sharpness faded quickly. This was dull and familiar, like a bruise pressed through cloth. "I shall make sure Cecily is ready when he comes to claim her." "How good you are." Lady Prudence touched her arm, a gesture for the room to see. Far more useful at home than on a dance floor. The 2 young matrons standing close enough to overhear hid their smiles behind their fans. Beatrice saw the motion without looking directly at them. She had become skilled at noticing reflections in mirrors, faces in polished silver, mouths shaping her name when they believed she was too proud or too tired to care. Useful. That was what remained when a woman failed to be desirable. Useful daughters wrote letters. Useful daughters remembered which aunt disliked cloves in pudding. Useful daughters sat beside elderly relatives, corrected younger sisters, rescued conversations, and were praised in private for having no life of their own. Her father, Sir Edmund Vale, stood near a column with a glass of wine in his hand. He had heard Lady Prudence. Beatrice knew he had heard because his fingers tightened once around the stem. He glanced toward his eldest daughter, then away. Sir Edmund was not a cruel man. Beatrice had told herself that for years, as if weakness were a gentler wound than malice. He disliked scenes. He disliked tears. He disliked accounts unpaid and creditors at the door and any conversation that required him to choose between comfort and justice. So he chose silence. Silence had become the Vale family inheritance, and Beatrice had received the largest share. "Cecily is coming," Lady Prudence said softly. "Smile, Beatrice. One must never let disappointment harden the face." Cecily drifted toward them in a cloud of blue, her cheeks bright with triumph. "Mamma, Lord Alastair says the supper set will be dreadfully crowded, but he shall endure it for my sake." "A promising sign," Lady Prudence replied. "A man who suffers inconvenience before marriage may be trained to suffer more after it." Cecily giggled, then turned her bright eyes on Beatrice. "Has anyone asked you yet?" Beatrice looked down at her dance card. Its little pencil rested unused in its loop. "No, how peaceful." Cecily tilted her head. "I almost envy you. It must be restful not to wonder who will come next." Lady Prudence gave a gentle sigh. "Cecily, darling, that is unkind." "I didn't mean it unkindly." Cecily widened her eyes. "Beatrice knows I don't." Beatrice had two choices. She could answer with the truth, which would create an ugly ripple and punish no one but herself. Or she could do what she had been trained to do since her father remarried when she was 12. She could make the room easier for everyone else. "Of course," she said. "You meant it lightly." "There," Lady Prudence said. "Beatrice understands." Cecily leaned closer, her fan hiding her mouth. "You always do. That must be why Mamma says you are such a comfort. You never expect anything." Something inside Beatrice went still. Not broken. Not even angry. Simply still. She looked at Cecily's lovely face and wondered, with sudden weary clarity, when her sister had learned that a woman's loneliness could be used as entertainment. Perhaps Cecily had not learned it at all. Perhaps she had inherited it, as easily as pearls. "Lord Alastair is watching you," Beatrice said. "You should not keep him waiting." Cecily glanced over her shoulder and brightened. "Oh, he is. Will you hold my fan while I dance with Mr. Avery?" "I promised Lord Alastair I would return before supper." She did not wait for an answer. The fan was placed in Beatrice's hand, light as a feather and heavy as expectation. Lady Prudence followed Cecily with her eyes. "You see how it is done, Beatrice. A woman must allow herself to be chosen while there is still time." Beatrice kept her gaze on the dance floor. "And when there is not?" Lady Prudence's expression softened into something almost worse than contempt. "Then she must learn to be gracious about the life that remains." The musicians began a lively country dance. Couples formed lines. Laughter rose. Silk brushed silk. Beatrice stood with Cecily's fan in one hand and her own empty dance card against her wrist, listening to the music move around her as though she were a chair no one had thought to remove. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine walking out. Not dramatically. Not in tears. Merely leaving the ballroom, descending the stairs, asking for the carriage, and returning to Lyndhurst House before anyone noticed she had gone. There would be consequences. Lady Prudence would call it sulking. Sir Edmund would look pained. Cecily would repeat the story prettily tomorrow. Still, the thought of air beyond the crowded room tempted her. She opened Cecily's fan, then closed it again. A scrap of ivory flashed at her wrist. Her dance card had twisted, its cover slightly open. Beatrice frowned. There had been nothing written there before. She was certain of it. She drew the card closer under the shelter of Cecily's fan. On the inside, in small violet letters tucked beneath the blank lines where gentlemen's names should have been, someone had written, "Reserved for pity." The words seemed at first too small to have weight. Then they entered her slowly, one by one, with the precision of pins. Reserved. For pity. Beatrice did not breathe. Around her, the ballroom continued as if nothing had changed. Lady Bramwell laughed near the fireplace. A footman passed with glasses of lemonade. Cecily turned in the dance, blue skirts floating, her smile bright enough to be seen from every corner. Lady Prudence watched her daughter with approval. Sir Edmund studied the pattern of the carpet. Beatrice closed the dance card. Her fingers were steady, which felt like a victory no one would applaud. She looked once more at the room, at the chandeliers burning above people who knew how to wound without consequence, and understood that if she stayed another minute, she would become exactly what they had decided she was. A woman waiting for mercy. She placed Cecily's fan on the refreshment table. Then she turned toward the doors. No one stopped her. No one called her name. That, too, was an answer. She had taken 3 steps when a gentleman crossed behind her, and a passing shoulder brushed the ribbon at her wrist. The ivory dance card slipped loose and fell to the polished floor. Beatrice heard the small, dreadful sound of it landing. She bent at once, but another hand reached it first. A man's hand. Strong, gloved in black, still against the pale ivory. For one suspended second, Beatrice saw only that hand and the card beneath it. Then the gentleman lifted it, opened it, and read the words inside. The noise of the ballroom seemed to withdraw. Beatrice raised her eyes. The man before her was tall, dark-haired, and dressed with the severe elegance of someone who had never needed ornament to announce power. His face was composed, but his gaze had gone very still. She knew him, of course. Everyone in London knew him. His Grace Sebastian Arden, Duke of Ellsmere, the man who never danced and rarely smiled, was holding her empty card as if it had just told him the truth about the entire room. For one heartbeat, Beatrice thought of snatching the card from the Duke's hand. It would have been foolish, unforgivably rude, and remembered by every person who already found her ridiculous. So she did not move. She stood in the bright cruelty of Lady Bramwell's ballroom and watched His Grace Sebastian Arden read the line Cecily had hidden inside the ivory cover. Reserved for pity. His expression did not change in any ordinary way. He did not gasp, frown theatrically, or glance about in search of scandal. He went still. That was worse. It was the stillness of a man who had found a crack beneath polished marble and was deciding how much of the house might be built upon rot. Beatrice felt he climbed the back of her neck. She wished he had found anything else. A torn glove. A dropped ribbon. A foolish note from a young girl with hopes too large for sense. Not this. Not the little inventory of her humiliation, written in violet ink and caught in the hands of a duke. Your Grace, she said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. I believe that belongs to me. His eyes lifted from the card to her face. They were grey, not soft, but not cold in the way society often called men cold when they were merely bored. There was attention in them. Exact attention. It settled on her without wandering to her faded lace, her unfilled card, or the corner of the room she had nearly escaped. Yes, he said. I believe it does. He closed the card at once. That small act struck her harder than the insult had. He had seen enough to understand. He also understood that no one else had the right to see it. Beatrice extended her hand. Then I shall trouble you to return it. It is no trouble. He placed it into her palm as if it were not an object of shame, but a letter of consequence. His gloved fingers did not brush hers. He was careful. The care made her want to look away. Before she could thank him, Lady Prudence appeared between them like a silk curtain drawn too quickly across an open window. Her smile was bright, maternal, and edged with warning. Your Grace, how kind of you to assist my stepdaughter. Beatrice is forever mislaying the small things one gives her. Beatrice closed her hand around the dance card. Lady Prudence's gaze flicked to it for less than a second. In that instant, Beatrice saw recognition. Not surprise. Recognition. Her stomach tightened. The Duke saw it too. Beatrice knew because his attention sharpened, almost imperceptibly, not toward the card but toward Lady Prudence's face. Small things often reveal larger habits, he said. Lady Prudence laughed softly. How very philosophical. You must forgive us. Balls make young ladies careless. Miss Vale does not strike me as careless. The answer was mild. The room was not. Though the music continued and couples still moved through the last figures of the country dance, a narrow circle of awareness had begun forming around them. Beatrice felt it in the turn of shoulders, the pause of fans, the eager faces pretending not to listen. Lady Prudence felt it too, and changed tactics. "You are generous to say so. Beatrice has always been dependable. One forgets she is still a young lady at all, do we not?" She gave a fond little sigh. "Cecily, however, is quite in need of guidance. She is over there, your Grace, in blue. I know she would be honored to make your acquaintance." Sebastian did not look towards Cecily. "I am acquainted with many young ladies in blue." The smile held on Lady Prudence's face, but it lost warmth. "Naturally. Yet Cecily Vale has been much admired this season." "So I observed. She is her father's great hope." That was not subtle. Beatrice heard the plea inside the polish, the family ambition wrapped like a sweetmeat. Cecily must be seen. Cecily must be chosen. Cecily must not be endangered by the inconvenient spectacle of her unmarried sister standing too near a duke. Beatrice tried to step back. "I should return to my family." "Yes, dear," Lady Prudence said, too quickly. "That would be best." Sebastian's gaze moved to Beatrice. "Before you go, Miss Vale, may I ask a question?" Every nerve in her body resisted. A question from a duke was not a private thing in a ballroom. It would become a rumor before midnight and an embellishment before breakfast. "If it is brief, Your Grace." Who believed this was amusing? Silence did not fall over the entire ballroom. It did not need to. The small silence around them was enough. Lady Prudence's fan opened with a delicate snap. "I beg your pardon." The words written inside Miss Vale's card. His voice remained low. Who believed they were amusing? Beatrice's hand tightened around the ivory cover. She should have lied. She should have laughed. She should have said it was nothing, a cousin's joke, a mistake, a scrap of nonsense. That was how peace survived in houses where truth had no safe chair at the table. But with the Duke's gaze on her, evasion felt suddenly exhausting. "It is not worth your concern," she said. Lady Prudence exhaled in relief. "There, you see. Beatrice understands perfectly. Some family teasing sounds harsher when removed from affection." Sebastian turned his head slightly. Was it affection? Lady Prudence's mouth parted. Beatrice answered before her stepmother could. "It was ink, Your Grace. Ink can be ignored." "Not always." His eyes lowered briefly to the card. "Violet ink." A chill passed through Beatrice so quietly that no one could have noticed. Violet ink. She had not thought of the color beyond the injury of the words. The Duke had. He had noticed. Lady Prudence recovered with admirable speed. "Your Grace is most attentive to stationery." "To evidence," he replied. The word should have been too severe for a ballroom. Somehow, spoken in his composed voice, it sounded like a natural part of the music. Lady Prudence drew herself taller. "I hope you do not mean to suggest that my household has done anything improper." "I have suggested nothing." He looked at Beatrice again. Miss Vale has not answered. Beatrice looked past him to Cecily, who had finished the set and now stood with Lord Alastair Fenwick near a marble column. Cecily was watching. She held her fan at her lips, and though her eyes were wide, they were not innocent. Beatrice could say her name. She could point across the room and watch the bright blue gown become a target instead of a triumph. The temptation lasted only a second. Then she imagined the carriage ride home, Lady Prudence's voice made of ice, her father's wounded silence, Cecily's tears sharpened into accusation. She imagined being told she had ruined everything because she could not bear a joke. More than that, she imagined becoming cruel in order to answer cruelty. "No," Beatrice said quietly. "I have not answered." Sebastian studied her for a moment. She expected disapproval. Instead, something like respect crossed his face and vanished before anyone else could read it. "A loyal answer," he said. "Not always a safe one." "Safety and loyalty are not often offered together to women in families," she replied before she could stop herself. Lady Prudence made a soft sound of warning. "Beatrice." The Duke did not smile, but the severity around his eyes shifted. "No," he said. Let her sentence stand. Beatrice's breath caught. No one in her family let her sentences stand. They trimmed them, corrected them, softened them, explained them away. The Duke had not raised his voice. He had not defended her with drama. He had simply refused to allow her words to be buried. It unsettled her more than any gallantry could have done. Lady Prudence saw the danger and moved swiftly back into grace. Your Grace, you must think us a very odd family. Beatrice has always had a serious turn. Cecily is the light-hearted one. If you would permit an introduction, I am sure she would brighten this unfortunate little moment. I do not find the moment unclear, Sebastian said. Nor do I require brightening. Lady Prudence's fan fluttered. But surely you did not come to Lady Bramwell's ball to inspect a spinster's dance card. The word landed. Spinster. It was not shouted. It was worse than shouted because it wore a smile. A lady near the punch bowl looked down quickly. A gentleman pretended to adjust his cuff. Beatrice felt the old shrinking begin at the edges of her body. There were words society used as rooms with no doors. Spinster was one of them. Once placed inside it, a woman might be visible and dismissed at the same time. Sebastian's gaze did not leave Lady Prudence. I came because Lady Bramwell requested my presence. Then, after a pause, he added, I remained because I dislike watching courage mistaken for failure. Beatrice forgot to breathe. Lady Prudence's smile thinned. How poetic, Your Grace. No. Merely accurate. The country dance ended. Applause scattered politely through the room. The musicians shifted their pages. A new rhythm began in fragments as bows touched strings. Beatrice recognized the opening of a waltz, slow and elegant, the sort of dance that changed the air around those who entered it. Cecily appeared at last, Lord Alastair beside her. Her cheeks were pink from dancing, her eyes bright with curiosity and alarm. Mamma, is everything well? Quite well, Lady Prudence said. His Grace was just returning Beatrice's card. Cecily glanced at the ivory cover in Beatrice's hand. For a fraction of a second, her lashes flickered. Sebastian noticed. Of course he noticed. His eyes moved from Cecily's face to the small reticule at her wrist, where a silver pencil and a tiny enamel ink case hung among ribbons. Violet enamel. Beatrice saw the connection form in his mind with frightening calm. He did not accuse. He did not expose. He simply stored the truth. Lord Alastair bowed. Your Grace. A pleasure. I believe Miss Cecily has been hoping for an introduction. Has she? Sebastian asked. Cecily recovered with a pretty curtsy. Everyone hopes for an introduction to you, Your Grace. Though I promise I shan't be tiresome about it. That is a rare promise in London. Cecily laughed as if he had complimented her. Lady Prudence seized the opening. Cecily has the supper dance unclaimed after Lord Alastair, I believe. Mamma, Cecily said, blushing perfectly. We mustn't presume. Beatrice knew the performance. She had rehearsed Cecily in modesty often enough to recognize the lines. Sebastian gave a courteous inclination of his head. Then I shall not place Miss Cecily in the discomfort of presumption. The faint color in Cecily's face deepened. Lady Prudence went very still. The waltz gathered itself. Around them, couples began to form. Beatrice stepped back again, wanting only to escape before the scene sharpened beyond repair. She had her card. The Duke had seen too much. Her family had seen that he had seen. Nothing good could come from remaining. Your Grace, she said, dipping a small curtsy. Thank you for returning what I dropped. His gaze came back to her, steady and unreadable. Miss Vale. He paused. The room seemed to lean closer without moving. Then Sebastian Arden, Duke of Ellsmere, turned away from the girl in blue, the ambitious mother, and the watching gentleman who expected him to do what rank and habit made easy. He looked only at Beatrice. The first notes of the waltz rose between them like a question no one in the room had expected him to ask. Sebastian Arden did not ask at once. He let the first measure of the waltz settle over the ballroom, let Lady Prudence's expectation arrange itself into certainty, let Cecily's pretty smile prepare to bloom into triumph, and only then did he turn toward Beatrice with the full attention of a man who understood the value of making a room wait. Beatrice felt that pause more keenly than if he had spoken at once. It pressed against every whisper, every lifted fan, every pair of eyes that had been pretending not to watch. She should have stepped away. She should have curtsied and escaped before the moment became large enough to crush her. Instead, she stood with the ivory-covered dance card in her hand and wondered how many seconds it took for a woman's life to change shape. Sebastian bowed. Not casually. Not with the careless politeness men offer to women they pitied. It was a formal, exact bow, deep enough to honor her and restrained enough not to mock the room with theater. "Miss Vale," he said, "may I have the next dance?" The words did not seem loud, yet they traveled. Beatrice heard a fan stop fluttering behind her. Lady Prudence's breath caught, very softly. Cecily's smile faltered as if someone had taken one blue ribbon out of place. Lord Alastair Fenwick looked from the Duke to Beatrice with the quick calculation of a man who had discovered a coin on the pavement and wished he had noticed it first. Beatrice did not answer. She could not. The question was simple. It was also impossible. His name was not merely a name. It was a rank, an estate, a lineage, a door before which ambitious families waited in satin shoes. Men like Sebastian Arden did not ask women like Beatrice Vale to dance after finding insults in their cards. Not unless they wished to make a point. Not unless the woman was the point. "Your Grace," Lady Prudence said, her voice still sweet but no longer smooth, "how very kind." Beatrice is not accustomed to the waltz. "That is fortunate," Sebastian replied. "Neither am I accustomed to offering it." A small ripple passed through the nearby guests. Beatrice knew why. The Duke of Ellsmere did not dance. He attended because rank required visibility. He spoke when spoken to, declined mothers with terrifying courtesy, and left before supper often enough that hostesses considered it a success if he remained past 11 o'clock. Yet he stood before Beatrice now with his hand extended, calm as if he had done nothing remarkable. Beatrice found her voice at last. "You need not be kind out of pity, Your Grace." His gaze did not waver. "I don't offer pity in public, Miss Vale." The answer reached only her, but it struck with the force of a bell. Beatrice looked down at his hand. If she refused, Lady Prudence would call it gratitude badly repaid. Cecily would say she had humiliated the family through pride. Society would say the spinster had panicked when fortune glanced her way. If she accepted, she would be displayed before everyone who had just watched her fail to be wanted. There was no safe choice. Perhaps there had never been a safe choice. Perhaps that was why her hand, after years of choosing caution, rose and settled lightly into his. "Then I accept," she said. The warmth of his gloved fingers closed around hers, firm and correct. Not possessive. Not familiar. A guide, not a claim. He led her toward the floor, and the ballroom parted. It was not a dramatic movement. No one wished to seem eager. Yet people shifted by inches, creating a path through curiosity and rank. Beatrice felt every inch of it. She passed Lady Prudence, whose smile had become a careful mask. She passed Cecily, whose eyes had brightened with something very close to anger. She passed Lord Alastair, who bowed as if he had always admired her. That, oddly, steadied her more than kindness would have done. False admiration was easier to recognize than hope. At the center of the floor, Sebastian turned to face her. "Can you waltz?" he asked. Inside the safety of the music, the question almost sounded ordinary. "Yes." "Recently?" "Not recently enough to be impressive." "Good. I dislike performances." The corner of her mouth nearly moved. "Nearly. That must make London exhausting." "Frequently." The first step came. Beatrice had expected to stumble. She had expected the room, the insult, the Duke's nearness, and her own disbelief to tangle her feet. Instead, Sebastian gave her the rhythm with subtle precision, and her body remembered what years of neglect had not erased. One step. Then another. The chandeliers shifted above them. The watching faces blurred into gold and ivory and judgment. For the first time that evening, Beatrice was not standing still while life moved around her. She was moving too. "You are looking at the floor," Sebastian said. "The floor has been a reliable companion. Tonight it has competition." She looked up before she could think better of it. His face was closer than it had been beside the refreshment table, though still at a proper distance. Candlelight found the hard line of his cheek, the dark sweep of his hair, the controlled mouth that seemed unused to easy expressions. He did not look like a man engaged in charity. He looked like a man examining a truth and disliking what it told him. "You should know," Beatrice said, "that my family will attempt to explain this dance before the set is over." "I expected so. They will say you were being generous. They may say what makes them comfortable." "And you?" "I am rarely comfortable." She almost laughed. The sound did not quite escape, but something in his eyes noticed the attempt. The music turned them past the place where Lady Prudence stood. Beatrice felt her stepmother's gaze like a pin at the back of her neck. Beyond her, Cecily spoke rapidly to Lord Alastair, who was no longer watching Cecily at all. He watched Beatrice with an interest that made her skin prickle. Sebastian noticed that too. His hand at her back remained proper, barely touching, yet his posture altered by a fraction, placing his shoulder between Beatrice and Lord Alastair's stare. It was such a small protection that no one else could have named it. She felt it anyway. "How long have they spoken to you as if you were already gone?" he asked. The question entered the music so quietly that she missed a step. Sebastian adjusted at once, turning the mistake into part of the dance. No one saw. That kindness nearly undid her. "You ask strange questions during a waltz, Your Grace. I have little talent for the expected ones. Most gentlemen ask whether I enjoy London. Do you?" "No," his gaze sharpened. "That was honest. You startled it out of me. Then I shall consider the evening useful." The next turn carried them toward the windows, where the air was cooler and the scent of flowers less heavy. Beatrice could have deflected. She had deflected for 17 years. She had a drawer full of phrases polished smooth by use. "My family means well. I am quite content. Cecily is young. Papa is tired. Lady Prudence worries for us all." Every sentence had once seemed merciful. Now they felt like stones in her mouth. "Long enough," she said, "to know silence keeps dinner peaceful." Sebastian's expression did not soften, but something in it deepened. Peaceful for whom? No one had ever asked that. Not her father. Not her aunts. Not the ladies who told her she bore disappointment beautifully. Not the clergyman who praised patience as if women were born to make altars of themselves. Beatrice looked past his shoulder to the edge of the room, where Lady Prudence watched with a face that promised consequences. "For everyone who is not me," she said. The answer should have frightened her. Instead, it made the air enter her lungs more fully. Sebastian was silent for 3 steps. Then he said, "You have been generous to cowards." She could not let that stand untouched. "My father is not cruel." "I did not say he was. He is weak. That is sometimes cruelty with cleaner gloves." Beatrice's throat tightened. The words hurt because they were not careless. They were too close to what she had never permitted herself to know. "You speak as if you have studied weakness. I was raised among men who called it prudence." The admission was small, but it was real. It passed between them quickly, gone before the room could steal it. Beatrice felt the first thread of curiosity pull through her fear. The Duke was not merely a rescuer arriving polished from a marble staircase. He knew something of houses where silence wore respectable clothes. "Then perhaps you understand why I did not answer your question about the card," she said. "I understand why you believed silence was safer. Was I wrong?" "Not for tonight." His gaze moved briefly beyond her, towards Cecily's blue gown and Lady Prudence's rigid smile. "But safety that requires you to disappear is not safety. It is management." The music swelled. Beatrice felt the words settle into a place inside her that had been empty for so long she had mistaken emptiness for calm. Management. Yes. That was what she had been doing. Managing rooms, tempers, debts, Cecily's ribbons, her father's shame, Lady Prudence's ambitions, and her own diminishing hopes. She had been useful because usefulness left no time to be wounded. The waltz neared its end. Panic touched her then, quiet and cold. When the music stopped, she would belong to the room again. The Duke would bow. Lady Prudence would collect her. Cecily would smile too sweetly. By morning, the dance might become a joke, a curiosity, or worse, a weapon. Sebastian seemed to read the thought in her face. "Miss Vale," he said, "your family will wish to turn this into an accident. It may be better if they do. For them, certainly. For me as well. Attention is not always a kindness." "No," he said. "But neither is obscurity." The final notes trembled through the ballroom. Sebastian guided her through the last turn and released her at precisely the right moment. His bow was faultless. Beatrice curtsied, aware that half the room had stopped pretending not to stare. For one brief second, she stood in the center of it all with the Duke's name newly written on her card and did not feel like a mistake. Lady Prudence began moving toward them at once. Cecily followed, her expression rearranged into injured sweetness. Sebastian saw them coming. He spoke before they arrived, his voice low enough for Beatrice alone. "May I call at Lyndhurst House tomorrow?" Beatrice looked at him. She should have refused. She should have protected the fragile order of her father's house. But the card at her wrist no longer felt only empty. It felt witnessed. "You may ask Lady Prudence," she said carefully. "I am asking you." The room seemed to still again, though perhaps that was only her own heart. No one had asked her first in years. Beatrice held his gaze and gave the smallest answer that could still be called brave. "Then yes, Your Grace. You may call." Sebastian inclined his head, and only then did he turn to meet Lady Prudence's approaching smile. Behind that smile, Beatrice saw alarm. Behind Cecily's, anger. And behind Lord Alistair Fenwick's courteous bow from across the room, she saw calculation beginning to wake. By 10 the next morning, the silver tray in Lyndhurst House had become an accusation. Calling cards lay upon it in a neat little drift of cream paper, each one proof that London had not forgotten what Lady Prudence had spent half the night trying to explain away. Lady Bramwell had sent hers first, a courtesy sharpened by curiosity. Lady Mercer followed, then Lady Anstruther, then two matrons who had never before crossed Sir Edmund Vale's threshold except in pursuit of Cecily. Each card seemed to whisper the same thing from the hall table. The Duke had danced with Beatrice. Lady Prudence stood over the tray as if she could command the paper to become blank. She had dressed for the morning with more care than usual, in a plum-colored gown that made her complexion look severe rather than warm. Cecily sat near the window, pale blue ribbons threaded through her hair, though the morning sun made the color appear too childish for her expression. Sir Edmund hid behind the newspaper, but Beatrice could see he was not reading. The page trembled slightly whenever a wheel sounded in the street. Beatrice sat at a small writing desk with household correspondence arranged before her. She had slept little. The ivory-covered dance card lay in her drawer upstairs, wrapped inside a handkerchief, yet she felt its weight as surely as if it still hung from her wrist. "This is precisely what I feared," Lady Prudence said. "A single imprudent moment, and now all London wishes to know whether His Grace has lost his judgment." Cecily looked up. Perhaps he was only being kind. Kindness from a duke is never only kindness when people have eyes. Lady Prudence turned to Beatrice. "You must say very little today. If he calls, and I am not convinced he will, you will let me guide the conversation." Beatrice folded a letter to the linen merchant. "His Grace asked to call." Men ask many things in ballrooms. "Not men like him," Cecily said, too quickly. Lady Prudence's glance cut toward her daughter. Cecily lowered her eyes, but her fingers worried the ribbon on her sleeve. Beatrice noticed the small enamel ink case hanging at Cecily's work basket, violet and silver, tucked half beneath a square of muslin. She looked away before anyone could see her looking. The footman entered at that moment, carrying another card. His Grace the Duke of Ellsmere. Silence struck the room with more force than any announcement. Sir Edmund's newspaper collapsed into his lap. Cecily stood so suddenly her chair scraped the floor. Lady Prudence's face emptied, then filled again with a smile polished enough for royalty. Beatrice remained seated because her knees had become untrustworthy. "Show his grace in," Lady Prudence said. "And bring tea." The best service. The best service had a cracked saucer hidden at the bottom of the cabinet, but no one mentioned that. Lyndhurst House had learned to conceal fracture beneath arrangement. When Sebastian Arden entered the drawing room, he brought no haste and no uncertainty with him. His morning coat was dark, his gloves immaculate, his expression composed. He bowed first to Lady Prudence, then to Sir Edmund, then to Cecily, and finally to Beatrice. The order was proper. The attention was not. Beatrice felt it settle on her like warmth through a closed window. "Your Grace," Lady Prudence said, extending a hand with graceful delight. "We are honored. You must forgive the simplicity of our morning. We did not expect such distinction at this hour." "I requested permission to call," Sebastian said. "I prefer to keep appointments." "How admirable." Lady Prudence motioned toward a chair positioned nearer Cecily than Beatrice. "Do sit." Cecily was only just speaking of the delightful music last night. Sebastian took the chair opposite Beatrice instead. Not beside her. Not too near. Precisely opposite, where conversation would be unavoidable and impropriety impossible. Was she? He asked. Cecily gave a soft laugh. "I'm afraid I spoke foolishly. I know very little of music beyond whether it is pleasant to dance to. That is a common standard." Beatrice looked down to hide the slight movement at her mouth. Lady Prudence heard the danger in that almost smile and leaned forward. "Beatrice plays a little, though she rarely performs. She has a serious nature. Useful, of course, but not entertaining." Sebastian turned to Beatrice. "What do you play, Miss Vale?" She had expected to be spoken about, not spoken to. "Mostly arrangements, Your Grace. Some Handel. Some Mendelssohn. Whatever my father's guests prefer after dinner." "And what do you prefer?" The room shifted. No one had asked that as if the answer mattered. "Quiet pieces," she said. "The sort that do not ask to be admired." That sounds less like music than a philosophy. Cecily laughed again, but uneasily. Lady Prudence set down her teacup. "Beatrice has many philosophies. She spends too much time with account books. They make women severe." "On the contrary," Sebastian said. "Account books often prevent men from pretending they are wiser than arithmetic." Sir Edmund coughed behind his hand. Beatrice saw the newspaper slide an inch, revealing a folded letter beneath it. The paper bore a solicitor's seal. Red wax, poorly broken, then tucked away in haste. Sebastian saw it too. His gaze rested there for no longer than a breath, yet Beatrice felt the recognition pass between them. Det had entered the room and taken a chair no one wished to acknowledge. Lady Prudence moved quickly. Beatrice assists with small household matters. Nothing of consequence. Then Lyndhurst House is unusually fortunate in its small matters, Sebastian replied. I have known estates imperiled by men who dismissed such work. Sir Edmund coloured. Beatrice rescued him because habit rose faster than resentment. Papa has had much to occupy him this season. The lie was gentle. Sebastian looked at her, and for a moment she wondered whether he would name it. He did not. Family responsibilities have a way of falling where there are capable hands, he said. Beatrice felt the sentence land where Lady Prudence could not easily sweep it away. Do you also manage local charity subscriptions? Sebastian asked. Some of them. Which? The Widow's Coal Fund in St. Jude's Parish. A small schoolroom for girls near Marylebone. Nothing grand. Grandness is rarely the measure of usefulness. His voice was calm, but Lady Prudence's fingers tightened around the teacup handle. Beatrice had the absurd sensation of being unfolded in public, not exposed, but revealed by someone who had noticed the lines in the paper. Cecily could not bear it. Your Grace, she said brightly, surely you did not come to hear about coal. I have heard less useful topics in far finer rooms, he replied. Before Cecily could recover, the footman announced another visitor. Lord Alastair Fenwick. Lady Prudence's expression sharpened with relief. Show him in. Lord Alastair entered with practiced ease, fair-haired, pleasant, and too aware of his own charm. He bowed over Lady Prudence's hand, greeted Sir Edmund as an old friend, and gave Cecily a smile that should have belonged to a suitor but carried the quick flicker of calculation toward Beatrice. "Miss Vale," he said, "you are quite the subject of London's curiosity this morning." Beatrice inclined her head. Curiosity is an occupation for those with leisure. Sebastian's eyes moved briefly to her. Lord Alastair smiled wider. "Indeed. Though a lady must be careful when she attracts it unexpectedly. London is not always merciful, especially to those who have waited long for notice." Lady Prudence murmured, "Lord Alastair." It sounded like protest. It was permission. Alastair stepped closer to the tea table. "I only mean that Miss Vale should not be made uncomfortable. At a certain point, admiration can become more burdensome than neglect. One must be grateful for any sincere attention that remains available." Beatrice felt every face turned toward her. Sir Edmund looked down. Cecily watched with bright, hungry stillness. Lady Prudence wore concern like lace. In the past, Beatrice would have smoothed the moment flat. She would have said Lord Alastair was kind. She would have made herself smaller so the room could continue breathing. Instead, she set her teacup down. The sound was soft. It was enough. "Gratitude is not the same as consent, my lord." Lord Alastair blinked. Cecily's lips parted. Sir Edmund looked up at last. Lady Prudence went very still. Sebastian did not move, but something in his face changed, a quiet approval that warmed Beatrice and steadied her at once. Alastair recovered with a laugh. "A sharp answer." "A plain one," Beatrice said. "Sharpness depends on how closely one leans toward the edge." For the first time that morning, Lady Prudence seemed uncertain whether to scold or smile. Sebastian spared her the choice. "Miss Vale has defined the matter clearly." His tone made the sentence final. Lord Alastair bowed, but the charm had hardened around his mouth. "Of course. I meant no offense." "Then none need be repaired," Beatrice replied. It was not forgiveness. It was dismissal, and the room understood the difference. Tea continued, though not comfortably. Sebastian asked Cecily a few polite questions and received practiced answers. He asked Sir Edmund about the roads to Hampshire and received nervous confusion. Then he turned back to Beatrice and asked whether the girls' schoolroom had enough winter slates. Beatrice answered before she could remember she was supposed to say little. She told him about the broken stove, the mistress who taught letters for almost no pay, and the way some mothers sent daughters only when work at home was light. She expected boredom. She found attention. Not softness. Attention. It made her careful and brave in equal measure. When Sebastian rose to leave, Lady Prudence accompanied him to the drawing-room door with Cecily at her side. Beatrice remained near the tea table, holding the silence that followed. At the threshold, Sebastian looked back. "Miss Vale, I thank you for explaining the schoolroom. It is a modest concern, Your Grace. That does not make it a small one." He bowed and was gone. The house seemed to exhale after him. Lady Prudence stood motionless until the front door closed below. Then she turned. The smile had disappeared. Cecily's eyes shone with angry tears she had not yet decided how to use. Sir Edmund reached for his newspaper, but Lady Prudence's voice stopped him cold. "This cannot continue." Beatrice met her stepmother's gaze and said nothing. Lady Prudence looked from the calling cards to the tea service to the chair Sebastian had chosen opposite Beatrice. If His Grace has mistaken embarrassment for merit, then London must be reminded what kind of woman invites embarrassment. Cecily wiped at one dry eye. "Mamma, what do you mean?" Lady Prudence's gaze settled on Beatrice with a calm that was far more dangerous than temper. "I mean, darling, that before a duke can admire your sister, he must be made ashamed of having noticed her." By the evening of Lady Prudence's dinner, Beatrice understood that humiliation could be arranged as carefully as flowers. Nothing in Lyndhurst House had been left to accident. The drawing-room lamps were trimmed low enough to flatter Cecily's complexion and hide the worn edge of the carpet. The dining table had been set with the best china, though Beatrice knew 2 plates had hairline cracks turned carefully toward the flowers. Cecily descended in a gown of soft white muslin threaded with blue satin, a vision of innocence prepared for admiration. Beatrice was given a brown silk dress from 2 seasons past, mended beneath one arm and pressed so severely that every fold looked obedient. Lady Prudence inspected her before the guests arrived. "That will do," she said. "One must not make a spectacle of disappointment." Beatrice looked at her reflection in the dark window glass. "I had not intended to." "No, dear. That is the trouble. You so often do without intending anything at all." Cecily laughed from the doorway, already wearing her pearls. "Mamma, don't scold her. Beatrice looks very appropriate." Appropriate. The word landed like a shawl placed over a chair no one wished to see. Beatrice fastened her gloves and said nothing. The guests came shortly after 7 o'clock. Lord Alastair Fenwick arrived first, all easy charm and pale gold hair, with the manner of a man who could make an unpaid tailor wait another month by smiling. Then came Mrs. Havisham and her niece, Miss Lucy Havisham, a shy girl of 17 whose nervous stammer emerged whenever she was noticed too quickly. Lady Prudence had invited them because Mrs. Havisham repeated everything she heard and believed discretion meant waiting until the carriage door closed. Sir Edmund moved through the greetings with a fixed expression, relieved by every subject that did not mention money. Beatrice arranged shawls, corrected a footman's placement of the soup ladle, and saw Lady Prudence watching her usefulness with satisfaction. The Duke had been invited for 7:30. Lady Prudence had said more than once that his Grace was unlikely to come, which meant she had prepared every sentence in case he did. At 7:15, Beatrice stood near the sideboard and heard Cecily whisper to Lord Alastair, "It was only one dance. Mamma says men of rank sometimes do odd charitable things when they are bored." Lord Alastair smiled over his wineglass. "Charity is admirable when it remains brief." Lady Prudence heard and did not correct them. Beatrice lowered her eyes to the place cards. Cecily had written them herself that afternoon in violet ink, with loops too pretty to be practical. One card had been blotted, then corrected with a small flourish beside Miss Lucy Havisham's name. Beatrice noticed the ink because she wished she did not. The colour was too familiar. At precisely 20 minutes past 7, before Lady Prudence had expected him and after she had begun to speak more freely, the footman opened the drawing-room door. His Grace the Duke of Ellsmere. Every conversation stopped as if caught by an invisible hand. Sebastian Arden entered with the same contained authority he had brought to the ballroom and to the morning call. He must have heard something. Beatrice knew it from the stillness in his eyes as he bowed. He had come early enough to catch Cecily's remark, or Lord Alastair's answer, or perhaps only the tone that lived beneath both. Lady Prudence recovered beautifully. "Your Grace, how punctual. We are honoured." "I dislike making households wait," he said. His gaze moved once to Beatrice. "Not long." "Long enough." Dinner was announced almost at once, which saved Lady Prudence from the problem of arranging conversation under the Duke's eyes. It did not save Beatrice. At table, she found herself placed between Mr. Pritchard, a widowed cousin of Lady Prudence who smelled faintly of cloves, and Miss Lucy Havisham, whose hands twisted in her lap whenever her aunt looked her way. Cecily sat across from Lord Alastair, near enough to shine at him. Sebastian had been meant to sit beside Lady Prudence. He paused at the table, read the cards, and with faultless courtesy said, "Lady Prudence, would you permit me to exchange? Sir Edmund wished to speak with Mr. Pritchard about Hampshire roads, I believe." Sir Edmund looked startled because he had wished no such thing, but he was too grateful for any topic that did not involve debt to protest. The change placed Sebastian beside Beatrice. It was done so smoothly that no one could call it preference, yet everyone understood it was not accident. Lady Prudence's smile tightened. "Of course, Your Grace." Soup was served. Conversation began in bright, brittle fragments. Lady Prudence guided it towards Cecily's accomplishments, Cecily's admirers, Cecily's prospects. Then, with the touch of a woman drawing a pin from silk, she turned to Beatrice. "My elder stepdaughter has always preferred useful occupations. We have quite depended upon her, have we not, Sir Edmund? Though I sometimes fear we encouraged her seriousness too much when she was young. A girl who makes herself indispensable may forget to make herself beloved." Mrs. Havisham gave a little sigh. "Poor Miss Vale. but usefulness is a comfort in later life. Beatrice felt Sebastian's attention beside her, not moving, not rescuing too soon. She kept her spoon steady. Comfort can be valuable. Lord Alistair leaned back. Indeed. Yet one hopes comfort does not become a lady's only ambition. Still, there is dignity in accepting what remains. Cecily lowered her lashes. Alistair, don't tease. Beatrice is very good. She never minds. Beatrice's fingers paused against the stem of her glass. She did mind. She minded with a quiet so deep it had almost become part of her breathing. Before she could answer, Miss Lucy Havisham reached for the salt and knocked her water glass. It tipped, spilling across the cloth and into the edge of Cecily's place setting. Lucy froze. Her face drained of colour. I am so sorry, she whispered. Cecily drew back sharply. Oh, Lucy. The disappointment in her voice was small and public. It made the girl shrink. Mrs. Havisham flushed with irritation. Lucy, really? You must learn not to make yourself awkward. Something in Beatrice moved before caution could stop it. She took her own napkin and laid it over the spill, then smiled at Lucy as if nothing worse than weather had occurred. It is only water. I once overturned an entire syllabub at Lady Caro's tea and survived to tell the tale. Lucy looked at her with grateful, wet eyes. Did you? I did. Lady Caro blamed the table leg, which was kind of her, as the table had not moved. A small laugh escaped from Lucy. Even Mr. Pritchard chuckled. The tension loosened. Cecily's face changed. She had expected awkwardness to remain where she placed it. Beatrice had moved it and turned it into mercy. Sebastian looked at Beatrice then, openly enough for her to feel the room notice. That was well done, he said. It was only water, Your Grace. No. It was kindness under observation. That is rarer. Beatrice looked down, but the warmth in her face was not shame this time. Lady Prudence cut into the pause. Beatrice has had practice smoothing little accidents. It is her talent. Then Lyndhurst House has profited from it, Sebastian said. His voice remained calm. Often, I suspect. The next course arrived, and with it Lady Prudence's patience thinned beneath her manners. She turned the conversation to estates, to tenants, to the burdens of property, hoping perhaps to remove Beatrice from any field where she might appear competent. His Grace must find such matters tedious at dinner, she said. Ladies cannot be expected to understand the weight of land management. Some ladies understand accounts better than heirs, Sebastian replied. Miss Vale spoke this morning of a schoolroom near Marylebone with more practical knowledge than many land stewards possess. Beatrice stared at her plate. Cecily's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Lord Alistair's gaze sharpened. A schoolroom, he said. How very industrious. I had not known Miss Vale had interests beyond keeping her sister company. You have not asked her many questions, Sebastian said. The table went quiet. Not wholly. Cutlery still touched china. A footman moved behind Sir Edmund's chair. But a listening quiet opened where laughter had been. Lord Alistair smiled. Then I shall remedy the defect. Miss Vale, do you enjoy being useful? Beatrice met his gaze. She was aware of Lady Prudence. Aware of Cecily. Aware of Sebastian beside her, silent now, giving her space to answer. I enjoy being necessary when necessity is honest, she said. I enjoy it less when people call it affection because they are ashamed to call it dependence. Sir Edmund's face went pale. Lady Prudence inhaled. Cecily looked as if Beatrice had dropped something far worse than water upon the tablecloth. Sebastian did not smile, but his approval was a presence beside her, steady as a hand at the back of a chair. A precise distinction, he said. Beatrice did not know what made her brave enough to continue. Perhaps it was Lucy's small grateful glance. Perhaps it was the memory of the dance card. Perhaps it was simply that once a woman had been seen, returning to invisibility required more obedience than she had left. Precision is useful in households, she said. It prevents confusion from being mistaken for peace. Lady Prudence's voice came softly. Beatrice, dear, you grow philosophical when tired. Then I shall sleep well tonight, Beatrice answered. It was not insolent. That made it worse. After dinner, the ladies withdrew to the drawing-room. Cecily crossed to the writing table under the pretense of correcting a place card that had been set aside. Beatrice saw the small violet enamel ink case open in her hand. A thin stroke of colour touched the card. Sebastian, entering with the gentleman a few minutes later, saw it too. His gaze did not move to Beatrice. It stayed on Cecily's hand, then on the ink, then on the card. A second piece of truth took its place beside the first. Cecily looked up and found him watching. Her smile trembled, then brightened too quickly. Your Grace, Mamma says we shall have music. Does she? Beatrice may play, if she isn't too tired from being precise. A few guests laughed because they believed they were meant to. Beatrice rose from her chair, but Sebastian spoke before she reached the pianoforte. I should like to hear Miss Vale only if she wishes to play. No one knew what to do with that condition. Least of all Beatrice. Lady Prudence's expression remained gracious, but her eyes were cold. Of course. We never compel Beatrice. The lie floated between them, delicate and absurd. Beatrice touched the back of the chair. Not tonight, I think. Cecily stared. Lady Prudence's mouth tightened. As you wish. The evening ended without open disaster, which meant Lady Prudence considered it a failure. When the guests took their leave, Sebastian bowed over Beatrice's hand without touching it. You hear what others try to hide, he said quietly. Beatrice's answer came before fear could polish it. So do you, Your Grace. For a moment, something passed between them that neither could name in a room full of witnesses. Then he was gone. The front door closed. Cecily turned on her mother at once, voice low and bright with anger. He watched her all evening. Lady Prudence stood very still beside the extinguished candles. Yes. Then what do we do? Lady Prudence looked toward the writing table where the violet ink had not yet dried on the corrected place card. Her face settled into calm. We make certain he regrets what he has seen. The note reached the Duke before Beatrice understood that London had already read it. It passed first through gloved hands in the crush room of the King's Theatre, folded into a square so small it looked harmless, then widened into whispers behind painted fans and opera glasses lifted at angles too deliberate to be accidental. Beatrice entered the veil box beside Lady Prudence with Cecily ahead of her in pale rose silk, and she felt the shift before she saw its cause. Conversation thinned, then resumed with a finer edge. A lady in emerald turned too quickly toward her companion. A gentleman who had once mistaken Beatrice for a chaperone looked directly at her and smiled as if he had discovered a private joke. Beatrice kept one hand on the velvet rail of the box and told herself that society required very little reason to stare. The theatre glowed with tier upon tier of candlelight, gilded mouldings, dark coats, jewels at throats, and faces half concealed by shadow. On the stage below, singers prepared for tragedy. In the boxes above, London had already begun one. Do sit, Beatrice, Lady Prudence murmured. Standing there only makes people notice you. Beatrice Saturday. Cecily lowered herself near the front of the box, where the light flattered her profile. Sir Edmund remained behind them, uncomfortable in evening dress and more uncomfortable beneath his wife's silence. Lady Prudence appeared composed, but she held her fan closed across her lap, which meant she was pleased or dangerous. Often, she was both. You look pale, Cecily whispered, turning just enough for concern to be seen by others. Are you unwell? No, then perhaps you feel the attention. I shouldn't like it either, not if I were you. Cecily, Lady Prudence said softly, with no real rebuke. We must be kind. The word kind had never sounded so much like a knife being polished. Beatrice looked past them toward the opposite boxes. There, across a wide space of light and music, Sebastian Arden stood beside an older gentleman in a high collar. Even at a distance, he seemed separate from the glitter around him. He did not lean, laugh, or perform indifference. He watched the room as if he had never trusted rooms at all. For one dangerous instant, Beatrice felt steadier. Then a folded paper changed hands near his shoulder. A young man in a green waistcoat passed it with a smirk, clearly hoping to entertain a duke with whatever nonsense amused the evening. Sebastian accepted it because refusal would have made a scene. He unfolded the note. Beatrice saw the precise moment he read her name. Nothing dramatic happened. He did not start. He did not glance wildly about. His face became unreadable in the way a locked door became unreadable. His eyes lowered again to the page. Lady Prudence's fan opened at last. "Ah," she said. "So it has reached him." Beatrice turned. "What has reached him?" Lady Prudence's brows lifted with delicate regret. "My dear, do not ask questions loudly. It suggests guilt." Sir Edmund shifted behind them. "Prudence, what is this?" "A nuisance," Lady Prudence replied. "Nothing more, if handled wisely." Beatrice's throat tightened. "What nuisance?" Cecily leaned closer, her perfume sweet and sharp. "Someone has circulated a note. It is dreadful, really. I don't know who would do such a thing." "What note?" "Beatrice," Lady Prudence said, still smiling toward the stage, "there is no need to make this more painful." Painful. The word opened a space in Beatrice's chest. Below them, the overture began, rich and solemn, but the sound seemed to come from very far away. Lady Prudence lifted a paper from beneath her reticule and laid it on Beatrice's lap as one might set down a dead flower. Beatrice looked at it. The handwriting was close enough to hers to turn her blood cold. Not perfect. Too rounded in some letters, too dramatic in others. But close. Close enough for people who wish to believe it. "Your Grace," it began, "I cannot forget the honor of your attention. Though my family may call me foolish, I know what passed between us upon the dance floor. If you meant what your eye suggested, I beg you to send one sign that I am not mistaken. Your devoted, Beatrice Vale." For several seconds, the words did not form meaning. They were only shapes. Then they became accusation. Desperation. Imagination. The cruel portrait of an unmarried woman who had mistaken a single dance for a promise. Beatrice's fingers went numb around the paper. "I did not write this." Cecily looked stricken. "Of course you didn't. No one who loves you would believe it." That was the trouble. People did not need to love her to believe it. They only needed to enjoy it. Lady Prudence folded the note again before anyone in the next box could see. "Lower your voice. You knew before we came." "I knew there was gossip. I hoped it might be contained." "Contained by bringing me here." Lady Prudence's eyes flashed. "Contained by showing that we are not afraid. A woman with nothing to hide does not absent herself from the opera. Unless her family has hidden the trap beneath her feet," Beatrice said. Sir Edmund made a small sound. "Beatrice." She turned to him. For one moment, she hoped. It was foolish. Hope often was. Her father looked at the paper, then at the backs of the watches in the neighboring box, then at his wife. "Perhaps we should discuss this at home." Lady Prudence's fan trembled once. "And confirm every whisper by leaving?" "Certainly not." Cecily's eyes shone, though no tears fell. "Mamma is trying to protect you. If you apologize quietly, perhaps His Grace won't think you encouraged the story." Beatrice stared at her. "Apologize for what?" "For the misunderstanding," Cecily said. "Men dislike being pursued, especially by women who should know better." There it was. Not the note alone. The sentence beneath it. A woman like Beatrice should know better than to be seen, better than to hope, better than to stand in the path of a duke's attention where younger women waited in brighter gowns. Beatrice folded her hands in her lap so tightly that the lace of her gloves pressed into her skin. "I will not apologize for a lie I did not write." Lady Prudence leaned nearer, her voice low enough to pass for tenderness. "Then you will sit quietly and let those who understand society repair what they can." The first act began. A soprano stepped into grief beneath painted arches and sang of betrayal in a language most of the audience pretended to understand. Beatrice watched the stage without seeing it. Around her, whispers moved like drafts beneath doors. She heard her name once. Then again. "Miss Vale." "The Duke." "Poor creature." so long unmarried. One dance. Imagine. Each fragment arrived wrapped in music. That made it worse, as if humiliation had been given an orchestra. Across the theatre, Sebastian remained standing for part of the act, the note still in his hand. At last he looked up. Their eyes met over the bright gulf between boxes. Beatrice searched his face for anger on her behalf, for disbelief, for the quiet understanding he had given her at dinner when he said she heard what others hid. She found control. Severe, perfect control. It was impossible to know what lived beneath it. For the first time since the waltz, she felt truly alone. When the curtain fell for the interval, the applause rose with relief. People stood, turned, entered the corridors, and carried the scandal with them. Lady Prudence took Beatrice's arm at once. To any observer, it would look maternal. Her fingers were firm. "You will come with me." "Where?" "Somewhere you may compose yourself." "I am composed." "Do not be proud over a matter already embarrassing." Before Beatrice could answer, a footman in Lady Bramwell's livery appeared at the entrance to the box and bowed. "Miss Vale." "His Grace the Duke of Ellsmere requests a word, if Mrs. Whitmore will attend as companion." "She is in the corridor." Beatrice's breath stopped at the name. Mrs. Helena Whitmore, her late mother's cousin by marriage, was one of the few women in London whom Lady Prudence could not easily dismiss. Respectable, widowed, and inconveniently plain-spoken, she attended the opera alone when she pleased and left when bored. Lady Prudence's face altered only by a fraction. "How thoughtful of His Grace," she said. "Yet Miss Vale is not well." "I am well enough," Beatrice said. The word surprised even her. Cecily gave a little gasp. Sir Edmund looked as though someone had asked him to stand before a cannon. Lady Prudence's hand tightened on Beatrice's arm, then released it because the footman was watching. "Very well. Mrs. Whitmore must remain within sight." "Of course," Beatrice said. She stepped out before fear could return her to the chair. The corridor outside the boxes was crowded with silk, black coats, perfume, and speculation. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Beatrice followed the footman past a cluster of ladies who pretended to examine a program. At the end of the passage, an anteroom door stood open. Mrs. Whitmore waited just inside, silver-haired and straight-backed, her expression sharp enough to cut through nonsense. "Come in, child," she said. "The door stays open. No one can faint from propriety." Despite everything, Beatrice almost smiled. Sebastian stood near the mantel with the original note in his hand. Not a copy. She knew it at once from the heavier paper and the wax trace where it had been folded. He bowed to Mrs. Whitmore, then to Beatrice. "Miss Vale." His voice was controlled, but she heard the strain now, buried deep. "Your Grace." She wanted him to say he knew. She wanted it with a force that humiliated her. Sebastian looked down at the paper, then back at her. "I have secured the note that was first circulated." First circulated. The word struck like the opening of a larger door. "There are others." "Copies." Mrs. Whitmore muttered something under her breath that sounded unfit for the theatre. Sebastian continued, "Before this goes further, I must ask you something directly." Beatrice felt the room narrow. The open door. The corridor. Mrs. Whitmore watching. The note in his hand. Her name at the bottom of words she had never written. "Ask, then." Sebastian's face remained still. Too still. "Did this come from your hand?" The question was proper. It was necessary. It was also a wound delivered with perfect manners. Beatrice looked at the man who had closed her dance card so no one else would see the cruelty inside it. Then she looked at the forged tenderness on the page between them. Her voice, when it came, was quiet enough that he had to listen. "No, Your Grace. But I see London has already enjoyed deciding otherwise." For a moment after Beatrice answered, the room held itself so still that even the noise from the corridor seemed to retreat. Sebastian did not speak. Mrs. Whitmore stood near the open door with her hands folded over the head of her cane, her sharp eyes moving from the Duke to Beatrice as if she could measure harm in the space between them. The forged note lay in Sebastian's hand, elegant, poisonous, and absurdly fragile. Beatrice had expected denial to release her from something. It did not. Her name remained at the bottom of the page. His question remained in the air. Did this come from your hand? Proper words. Necessary words. Words a reasonable man might ask when society had begun sharpening her reputation into sport. Yet reason did not make them gentle. I had to ask, Sebastian said at last. His voice was lower than before. No, Beatrice replied. You chose to ask that first. The small correction struck him. She saw it in the slight tightening at the corner of his mouth, a flicker no one in a ballroom would have noticed. Here, with Mrs. Whitmore as witness and the door open to preserve what society called safety, it felt almost intimate. Miss Vale, I do not believe gossip merely because it is repeated. How fortunate for me. Her voice was calm. Too calm. She heard the chill in it and did not call it back. But you believed enough to begin with suspicion. I began with the matter that must be answered before I can act. Yes. A gentleman must establish facts. She lifted her eyes to his. A friend might have asked who wished to injure me. The word friend altered the room. It had come without permission, too honest to be retrieved. Sebastian looked down at the note. You are right. The answer should have soothed her. Instead, it made the hurt sharper because he understood it too late. I know I am. Mrs. Whitmore made a faint sound that might have been approval. In the corridor, laughter rose and fell, light as glass. The opera audience was returning to its seats, carrying scandal back to music. Sebastian folded the note with care. I will find who wrote this. Will you? Yes. Because your name has been used. His gaze returned to her. Because yours has. The reply touched a place she was trying hard to guard. She could not afford softness now. Not when the same man who had made her feel seen had also made her feel examined. Your Grace, I have spent too many years being a household inconvenience dressed as a duty. I know when I am being managed, even by those who intend kindness. I am not managing you. Not yet. But men of rank are often praised for arranging other people's lives before asking whether those lives wish to be arranged. He absorbed that in silence. The restraint in him did not vanish, but it changed shape. It no longer looked like judgment. It looked like regret refusing to plead for comfort. Then tell me what you require. Beatrice almost laughed, not because anything was amusing, but because the question was so unfamiliar that her mind could not immediately understand it. What did she require? Not rescue wrapped in command. Not pity with a ducal crest. Not another person deciding what version of the truth would cause the least inconvenience. Tonight, I require nothing from you, she said. That is not pride. It is survival. His eyes darkened. Miss Vale. You asked the question a gentleman must ask. Not the question a friend would ask first. She curtsied before her courage failed. Good evening, Your Grace. Sebastian stepped aside at once. He did not block the door. He did not reach for her. He let her pass, and that courtesy nearly broke through what his question had damaged. Mrs. Whitmore followed her into the corridor, keeping close enough to silence speculation. Child, the older woman murmured, you need not go back to that box. I do. Beatrice looked toward the bright opening where Lady Prudence waited with concern arranged for public view. If I do not, they will say the note drove me out. Mrs. Whitmore's mouth tightened. Then sit straight enough to frighten them. Beatrice did. She returned to the Vale box and sat through the second act while grief sang beneath painted skies and London watched to see whether she would bend. She did not. Lady Prudence said nothing until the carriage carried them away from the theatre, the wheels rattling over the dark streets toward Lyndhurst House. Cecily sniffed once beside her mother, as if the evening had wounded her. Sir Edmund stared out the window. You spoke with him too long, Lady Prudence said at last. The door was open. Do not play innocence with me. I'm not playing anything, Beatrice said. Cecily gave a soft gasp. Sir Edmund shifted but offered no help. Lady Prudence's eyes gleamed in the dim carriage light. Then let me be clear. Whatever girlish vanity has possessed you since that dance, end it. His Grace will not marry a woman made ridiculous before the opera. If he is honorable, he will withdraw. If he is proud, he will resent having been pulled into your embarrassment. Beatrice looked down at her gloved hands. I did not write the note. Truth is useful only when society is willing to hear it. The words settled like frost. By the time they reached Lyndhurst House, Beatrice was tired past tears. She went upstairs under the pretense of removing her gloves, but she did not go to her room first. She went to the small sitting room where Cecily kept her embroidery, ribbons, dance favors, and all the pretty evidence of a life built for display. The lamps were low. The house had fallen into that uneasy quiet that followed public danger. Beatrice knew she should not search. She knew exactly how Lady Prudence would name it if she were caught. Yet the forged note had not appeared from mist. Violet ink had touched her dance card. Violet ink had marked Cecily's place cards. And tonight a false letter had worn Beatrice's name like stolen lace. On the little table beside Cecily's chair sat the sewing basket lined in blue silk. Beatrice lifted the muslin square on top. Beneath it lay thread, scissors, a packet of needles, and scraps of paper folded small. Her breath stopped. She opened the first scrap. It was only a list of ribbons. The second held 2 careless lines about Lord Alastair's supper dance. The third had been torn across the middle, but enough remained. I cannot forget the honor of your attention. Though my family may call me foolish. Beatrice stood very still. The handwriting was not fully Cecily's, or not only Cecily's. It had the same pretty loops, but several words were corrected in a firmer, older hand. One line had been rewritten above the first, sharper and more cruelly exact. If you meant what your eye suggested. Beatrice folded the scrap once, then again. It felt hotter than paper should feel. That does not belong to you. Lady Prudence stood in the doorway. She wore no shawl, and her face, without the softness she kept for company, looked almost unfamiliar. Cecily hovered behind her, white with fear and anger. Beatrice closed her hand around the scrap. No, she said. It belongs to the person whose name was used. Lady Prudence stepped into the room. You foolish girl. Do you imagine anyone will believe you over your sister? I imagine the Duke may be interested. Cecily made a small, frightened sound. Lady Prudence did not look at her. His Grace will be interested in avoiding scandal. Men in his position always are. Beatrice held the scrap tighter. Then why are you afraid? The silence that followed was the first honest thing Lady Prudence had given her all night. Then her expression settled, smooth and deadly calm. Because your father is 1 letter away from ruin. Because dressmakers, lenders, and tradesmen have waited longer than pride permits. Because if you drag this family through public disgrace, I will make certain every debt attached to Sir Edmund's name is laid before London. Your precious father will not survive that humiliation. Beatrice felt the threat strike where Lady Prudence intended it. Not at her own reputation. At the weak man downstairs who had failed her and whom she still, painfully, loved. You would destroy him to silence me. I would preserve Cecily's future from your bitterness. This is not bitterness. Beatrice lifted the scrap. This is proof. Lady Prudence's eyes dropped to the paper. Proof becomes nothing when the woman holding it is called unstable. Cecily whispered, Mamma, don't. Be quiet. The command was soft, and Cecily obeyed at once. Beatrice saw then what she had not wanted to see. Cecily had written the insult. Cecily had enjoyed the game. But the shape of this ruin was Lady Prudence's. The room seemed to tilt, not from fear, but from clarity. You should sleep, Lady Prudence said. By morning you will understand that silence is the kindest choice left to you. Beatrice slipped the torn draft into her glove. No, she said, her voice low and steady. By morning, I shall understand whether I am still willing to purchase peace with myself. Lady Prudence's smile returned, thin as a blade hidden in silk. Take care, Beatrice. Women like you have very little to bargain with. Beatrice looked at Cecily's trembling face, then at the woman who had mistaken years of endurance for surrender. Then it should not frighten you when I stop bargaining. She walked past them before either could answer, carrying the torn draft, the ruined evening, and one terrible new certainty. She could not remain in a house where her silence was no longer requested, but bought. Beatrice did not sleep. Dawn came thin and grey over Lyndhurst House, touching the curtains with a light too pale to feel merciful, and still she sat at the little desk in her bedchamber with the torn draft beside her candle. The paper had been folded and unfolded so many times that the crease had weakened beneath her fingers. "I cannot forget the honour of your attention. Though my family may call me foolish." The words were not hers, yet they had worn her name before all London. That was one theft. The deeper theft had been quieter. Lady Prudence had taken years of Beatrice's obedience and called it duty, taken her silence and called it sweetness, taken her usefulness and called it love. By morning, Beatrice understood that if she remained, the next thing taken would be the last part of herself that still knew the difference. She rose before the house fully stirred. There was no dramatic packing, no sweeping of gowns into trunks, no scene fit for servants to repeat below stairs. Beatrice owned little that could not be spared and even less that she wished to carry. She chose one plain dark travelling dress, 2 shifts, her mother's small packet of letters tied with faded blue ribbon, the torn draft from Cecily's sewing basket, and 3 household account pages she had copied in her own hand during the long months when Sir Edmund refused to look at numbers. Last, she opened the drawer where the ivory-covered dance card lay wrapped in a handkerchief. For a moment, she did not touch it. Its polished cover looked innocent in the dimness, as if it had never held insult, witness, or the beginning of danger. Then she took it and placed it with the letters. It was not proof only of cruelty. It was proof that she had been there. Proof that she had been seen. A soft knock came at the door. Beatrice turned sharply. Her maid, Anna, stood in the opening with wide eyes and a shawl over her plain morning gown. "Miss Vale," she whispered, "you're dressed." "Yes." "Is there to be trouble?" Beatrice looked at the small portmanteau on the bed. Lying would have been kinder for 1 minute and crueler for every minute after. "Not if I can leave quietly." Anna's face changed. Not shock. Understanding. Servants in Lyndhurst House understood more than their employers wished. "Shall I call a hackney coach, miss?" "A respectable one. From the stand near Hanover Square, if possible." "I am going to Mrs. Whitmore in Bloomsbury." Anna nodded at once. "I'll see to it." "You may be questioned." "Then I won't know anything useful." The loyalty in the answer tightened Beatrice's throat. She had not expected kindness to make departure harder. "Thank you, Anna." The girl hesitated. "Miss, you should take the blue shawl. The one that was your mother's. It is cold." Beatrice almost refused from habit. Then she remembered that she was leaving a house where even warmth had been portioned by someone else. "Yes," she said. "I shall take it." When Anna slipped away, Beatrice sat to write. The letter to Sir Edmund took longer than the packing. Anger could have written quickly. Love, even wounded love, moved more carefully. "Papa," she began, then stopped because the words still belonged to childhood, to a father who had once carried her across a muddy garden path so she would not spoil her shoes. She began again. "Sir, I have left Lyndhurst House because I can no longer preserve peace by surrendering truth. I did not write the note circulated at the opera. I have evidence of that fact. I have also seen enough to understand that my silence has become more valuable to this household than my dignity. I do not leave to shame you. I leave because I will not remain where shame is used to govern me." Beatrice paused, listening. Somewhere below, a door opened. A servant carried coal. The ordinary sounds of the house continued, indifferent to the fact that one life inside it was dividing itself into before and after. She dipped the pen again. "I have loved you, even when you found it easier not to defend me. That love does not oblige me to be useful at my own expense." She signed her name before courage could fail. "Miss Beatrice Vale." Not dear daughter. Not your obedient child. Her own name looked strange and steady at the bottom of the page. She left the letter upon his desk downstairs, beneath the silver paper knife he never used to open unpleasant correspondence. The hall seemed longer than it had the night before. Every portrait watched her. Every polished surface reflected a woman in a plain travelling dress with a blue shawl folded over one arm and a small portmanteau in her hand. She had expected fear to weigh more. Instead, the house did. The banister her hand had polished by habit. The stair she had descended to mend quarrels. The door through which she had watched Cecily leave for dances, visits, and victories. Beatrice reached the threshold and did not look back. Outside, the morning air struck her face, cold enough to make her breathe honestly. The hackney coach waited at the curb. Anna stood beside it, trying not to cry. Beatrice gave her one last nod, climbed in, and closed the door. As the coach rolled away from Lyndhurst House, no one called after her. That, too, was an answer. Bloomsbury felt like another country, though it lay only a few miles from Mayfair's brighter squares. Mrs. Helena Whitmore lived in a narrow brick house with clean steps, polished brass, and no patience for useless ceremony. She opened the parlour door herself before the maid could finish announcing Beatrice. "There you are," she said, as if she had been expecting her since birth. "Come in before courage catches cold." Beatrice stood in the hall with the portmanteau in her hand and found, suddenly, that she could not speak. Mrs. Whitmore took the bag from her. "No speeches first. Tea first. Truth after." The parlour was modest, warm, and orderly without being cruel about it. Books stood in uneven rows. A little fire burned low. There were no pastel cushions arranged to flatter visitors, no flowers chosen to suggest prosperity, no smiling portraits of people who had failed to protect one another. Beatrice sat in a chair near the hearth and felt the silence around her. It did not demand performance. Mrs. Whitmore poured tea strong enough to revive the dead and waited until Beatrice had taken 3 sips. "Now," she said. "Show me." Beatrice handed over the torn draft. Mrs. Whitmore read it once. Then again. Her mouth became a thin line. "That foolish girl wrote some of it." "Cecily." "Yes. But not all." Mrs. Whitmore carried the paper to the window and tilted it toward the morning light. "Here. The pressure changes. These corrections are older, firmer. A woman accustomed to giving orders, not asking favors. Lady Prudence. I should be more surprised if I had liked her." Beatrice let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost pain. Mrs. Whitmore returned to the chair opposite her. "You may stay here as long as required. I cannot involve you in scandal. My dear, I am a widow past 50 with an income of my own and opinions I have never successfully hidden. Scandal limps when it runs toward me." The kindness, brisk and unsentimental, reached Beatrice at last. Her eyes burned. She looked down quickly. "I did not know where else to go. That is what relations are for when they have any sense. Your mother would have sent you to me sooner." The mention of her mother made the room blur for one dangerous second. Beatrice pressed her hands together. "I left a letter for Papa." "Good." "Lady Prudence threatened to expose his debts if I spoke." Mrs. Whitmore's eye sharpened. "Then we must assume the debts are worse than he admits." "They are." Beatrice drew the copied account pages from her portmanteau. "Dressmakers, wine merchants, money borrowed against expectations that do not exist. Cecily's presentation has been paid for with delays and promises." Mrs. Whitmore studied the pages. "And you kept the house from collapsing." "I kept it appearing upright." "That is not the same thing." "No," Beatrice said. The word felt like a small door opening. "It is not." By midday, Lyndhurst House had discovered her absence. The first note arrived before 2 o'clock, carried by a footman who looked embarrassed enough to have a conscience. It was from Lady Prudence, written in a hand so controlled it seemed carved. "You will return at once. Your distress has been noticed. Every hour of absence worsens what little may yet be repaired." Mrs. Whitmore read it aloud, snorted, and placed it beneath the teapot to protect the table from heat. The second message did not come to Bloomsbury. It went outward, into drawing-rooms and afternoon calls, carried by Lady Prudence's wounded maternal voice. Miss Beatrice Vale had fled in shame after the unfortunate opera misunderstanding. The poor thing had always been sensitive. The family was devastated. By late afternoon, the lie had begun to move faster than any carriage. At nearly 4 o'clock, Sebastian Arden arrived at Lyndhurst House and was admitted because Lady Prudence could not refuse a duke without creating a larger question. He found not Beatrice, but Sir Edmund standing in the drawing-room with the look of a man who had mislaid something precious and feared to admit he had never guarded it. "Where is Miss Vale?" Sebastian asked. Lady Prudence answered before Sir Edmund could. "Resting with a family connection. She has been overwrought." Sebastian's gaze went to Sir Edmund. "Is that true?" Sir Edmund swallowed. "She has gone to Mrs. Whitmore." "Gone," Sebastian repeated. "Or driven?" Lady Prudence stiffened. "Your Grace, grief can make a woman dramatic. Cruelty can make her practical." The room froze. Sir Edmund's face folded with shame. Sebastian turned fully to him. "Sir Edmund, you permitted your daughter to be mocked in a ballroom, slandered at the opera, and threatened under your roof. Do not compound cowardice by calling her departure hysteria." Sir Edmund gripped the back of a chair. "I did not know how far it had gone." "No," Sebastian said. "You did not wish to know." He left Lyndhurst House without asking Lady Prudence's permission for anything. An hour later, a note arrived at Mrs. Whitmore's door. It was addressed to Beatrice in a firm, spare hand. She opened it by the fire while Mrs. Whitmore pretended not to watch. "I asked wrongly. I am sorry." Beatrice read the sentence once, then again. It did not repair the note at the opera. It did not erase the question that had wounded her. But it did something she had not expected from a duke. It did not excuse itself. She folded it carefully and placed it beside the ivory-covered dance card, the torn draft, and her mother's letters. For the first time in many years, Beatrice slept in a room where no one expected her to earn the right to remain. By the second morning in Bloomsbury, Beatrice learned that freedom could be quiet and still feel perilous. Mrs. Whitmore's house did not demand her usefulness. No one asked her to mend a conversation, soften a creditor's letter, or turn Cecily's vanity into girlish charm. Breakfast came without accusation. The fire was lit without complaint. Her cup of tea was placed beside her because she was a guest, not because she had earned kindness by making herself convenient. Yet the peace did not rest easily in her. London had already been told she had fled in shame. Lady Prudence would be spreading concern like perfume, and concern, in the right voice, could ruin as efficiently as cruelty. Beatrice sat at the parlour table with the ivory-covered dance card, the torn draft, and Sebastian's note arranged before her. "I asked wrongly. I am sorry." The apology was brief enough to fit inside a closed fist. She had read it too many times. Mrs. Whitmore watched over her spectacles from the opposite chair. "If you read that note once more, child, it may begin charging rent." Beatrice folded it at once. "I was not reading it for comfort." "Of course not. Women never look twice at apologies from dukes for comfort. We study them for penmanship." Beatrice almost smiled. Almost. The knock at the front door ended the moment. It was not the brisk knock of a tradesman or the light tap of a timid caller. It was confident, measured, and slightly theatrical. Mrs. Whitmore's mouth flattened. That is a man who expects to be admitted. The maid entered a moment later with a card upon a salver. Mrs. Whitmore glanced at it and made a sound of distaste. "Lord Alastair Fenwick." How ambitious of mildew to announce itself. Beatrice rose. "I will not receive him." "Good." The maid hesitated at the door. "My lady, he says the matter concerns Miss Vale's reputation." Mrs. Whitmore's gaze sharpened. Beatrice felt the familiar pressure of society's trap. Refuse him, and he would say she feared him. Admit him, and he would believe he had power. "The parlour door remains open," Beatrice said. "You will stay, Mrs. Whitmore." "I would sooner leave a cat alone with cream." Lord Alastair entered wearing an expression of grave concern so polished it must have taken practice. He bowed deeply to Mrs. Whitmore, then to Beatrice, and let his eyes rest a moment too long on the modest room, the small fire, the plain curtains. He saw at once that she was not desperate in comfort, and the discovery displeased him. "Miss Vale," he said, "I am relieved to find you safe." "Relief is generous, my lord, considering I did not inform you I was in danger." London is dangerous for a lady whose name has become conversation. He turned his hat in his hands. I have come as a friend. Mrs. Whitmore settled more firmly into her chair. Then you are overdressed for the role. Alastair's smile thinned, then returned to Beatrice. I shall be direct. Your situation is delicate. The opera note, your departure from Lyndhurst House, the Duke's unfortunate involvement. These matters grow worse when not contained. Contained by whom? Beatrice asked. By someone willing to stand beside you despite misunderstanding. He paused, letting the offer gather shape in the air. I am prepared to do so. Beatrice looked at him. He did not blush. He did not lower his eyes. He truly believed that what he offered had value enough to purchase her silence. You are proposing marriage. I am offering protection. That was not my question. His jaw tightened. Yes. If matters continue as they are, I would be willing to make an offer. It would save your name from harsher interpretation. It would reassure society that you had not fixed your hopes improperly upon his grace. Mrs. Whitmore tapped her cane once against the floor. How noble. St. George must be trembling for his profession. Alastair ignored her. There would, naturally, need to be discretion. No public accusations. No unpleasant airing of family matters. Lady Prudence is anxious only for peace. Your father is not strong. Your sister is young. A generous woman would consider them. And what would you consider? Beatrice asked. His eyes flickered. I beg your pardon. My silence would benefit Lady Prudence. My marriage would end gossip. My retreat from the truth would protect Cecily. But you are not a charitable institution, Lord Alastair. What would you gain? The charm dropped for half a second. Beneath it lay irritation and hunger. A wife who understands gratitude. Beatrice's hands remained folded, but inside her something unclenched. She had been afraid of him as a threat. Now she saw him clearly as a bargain wrapped in manners. Then you must seek one elsewhere. Miss Vale, do not mistake pride for wisdom. I am not proud. I am experienced. You have very few allies. Then I shall not reduce their number by marrying an enemy. His face colored. Mrs. Whitmore gave a satisfied little sniff. Alastair bowed, shallowly now. You may regret refusing a respectable hand when society grows less sympathetic. Society has never been sympathetic enough to guide my choices. His Grace will not marry you. The sentence came sharper than he intended. There it was. The fear beneath the offer. The Duke's attention had turned Beatrice from an object of pity into a piece on the board. Perhaps not, she said. But I will not marry you to make that question easier for others. Alastair looked toward the door, then back at her. Lady Prudence will not let this rest. Neither shall I. He left with less grace than he had entered. Mrs. Whitmore waited until the door closed before speaking. That man needs money. Yes. And he thought you might be bullied into becoming an income. Beatrice touched the torn draft on the table. No more. Before noon, another card arrived. This one altered the parlor before the servant finished speaking. His Grace the Duke of Ellsmere. Mrs. Whitmore looked at Beatrice. Do you wish to receive him? The question mattered. Because it was a question. Beatrice looked at Sebastian's folded apology beside the dance card. Yes. With you present. Sebastian entered without Alastair's performance. He bowed to Mrs. Whitmore, then to Beatrice, and remained standing until Mrs. Whitmore told him sharply that a duke might still use a chair if he remembered not to command the air around it. He Saturday. Beatrice saw at once that he had not slept much. The control remained, but there was a shadow beneath it, not weakness, but effort. Miss Vale, he said, thank you for receiving me. Mrs. Whitmore's door is open. As it should be. He reached into his coat and placed a folded paper on the table. The original note. Beatrice did not touch it at once. You kept it. I secured it before copies multiplied beyond usefulness. Usefulness to whom? To you, if you choose to contest the lie. There it was again. If you choose. The words were careful, perhaps because he had learned what his last careful words had cost. Beatrice unfolded the note. The handwriting still turned her stomach, but now she looked at it with cooler eyes. Violet ink. A flourish beneath her name. A wax trace near the edge. A misspelling in the word embarrassment that Cecily had made twice in childhood copybooks. Sebastian noticed where her gaze stopped. You see it? Cecily always forgets the double R. Yes. He placed another small paper beside it. The place card from your family dinner. I obtained it from a servant after asking whether any discarded cards remained. I paid for the replacement, not for silence. Mrs. Whitmore gave him a narrow look that suggested he had passed one small examination. Beatrice compared the letters. Her pulse quickened. The ink is the same. Likely from the same source. The wax is also from Lyndhurst House. It bears a partial impression from a seal with a Vale crest, not mine. Lady Prudence corrected the draft. Beatrice slid the torn scrap across the table. Sebastian read it. This time, the severity in his face did not wound her because it was not aimed at her. This is her hand. Mrs. Whitmore believes so. I do, Mrs. Whitmore said. And I am seldom charitable where Prudence Vale is concerned. Sebastian looked at Beatrice. I have spoken with a solicitor. Discreetly. He can prepare a memorandum of the evidence without turning this into a legal spectacle. But that is only one option. Beatrice heard what he was offering. Rank. Evidence. A path through scandal. The same power that had lifted her into the center of a ballroom could now carry her name above gossip. It tempted her, and that frightened her. Your Grace, she said slowly, do you wish to clear my name, or possess the story of clearing it? The question struck him harder than anger might have done. He did not answer quickly. She respected him more for that. At the opera, he said at last, I asked the question that allowed me to act. I failed to ask the question that would have allowed you to breathe. Beatrice looked down at the forged note. Yes. I cannot undo that. No, I do not want possession of your story. His voice lowered. I want the truth spoken in a way that does not require you to vanish again. The room seemed very quiet. Mrs. Whitmore looked into the fire, granting them the mercy of not watching too openly. Beatrice rested her fingers on the ivory dance card. Then tell me how you think it should be done. I think Lady Prudence will try to force you into a public apology before women whose opinions govern invitations. Lady Penhurst. Yes. She has already been approached. Beatrice's stomach tightened. By Lady Prudence. And by Lord Alistair. He called at your house after leaving here. He works quickly. Men with empty pockets often do. A faint, unexpected humor touched the sentence, then faded. If Lady Penhurst summons you, you need not attend. If I do not, they will say guilt kept me away. They will. Then I will attend. Sebastian's gaze held hers. How do you want the truth spoken? The answer rose slowly, not from fear, but from the place in her that had carried silence too long. I will speak first. Then I will make certain they let you. It was not rescue. Not exactly. It was space. It was the offer of a door held open while she chose whether to walk through. Beatrice folded the forged note and placed it beside the torn draft. After the truth is settled, Sebastian said, more quietly, I would like permission to call again. Not as a witness. Not as a duke correcting scandal. As a man asking to know you properly. Mrs. Whitmore coughed into her teacup with no attempt at subtlety. Beatrice felt heat rise to her face, but she did not look away. Ask me after the truth is settled. I will. The next morning, Lady Penhurst's invitation arrived on heavy cream paper, formal, gracious, and impossible to misunderstand. Miss Beatrice Vale was requested to attend a private drawing-room assembly that afternoon, along with her father, Lady Prudence, Miss Cecily Vale, Lord Alistair Fenwick, and His Grace the Duke of Ellsmere. Beatrice read it once. Then she placed it beside the dance card, the forged note, and the torn draft. For the first time, the evidence did not look like ruin. It looked like a voice waiting to be used. Lady Penhurst's invitation lay upon Mrs. Whitmore's parlour table with the terrible quiet of a sealed verdict. It did not command. It requested. That was how power moved among well-bred women in London. A request from Lady Penhurst, written in her narrow, elegant hand and delivered by a footman in sober livery, could not be refused without becoming an answer. Beatrice read the words a third time, though she had understood them at once. A private drawing-room assembly. This afternoon. The relevant parties. Relevant. Society had a gift for making cruelty sound administrative. Mrs. Whitmore stood at the window, watching the messenger depart down the steps. She has chosen her stage carefully. Beatrice folded the invitation and placed it beside the forged note. Lady Prudence must have reached her first. Undoubtedly. She will have spoken of distress, family concern, your nerves, and the dangerous kindness of men who encourage disappointed women. You know her language well. I have lived long enough to recognize poison when it is served in porcelain. Beatrice looked at the table. The evidence seemed both too much and not enough. The ivory-covered dance card. The torn draft. The original forged note Sebastian had brought. The copied household account pages. A place card from the Vale dinner with Cecily's loops and violet ink. Each piece told part of the truth, yet truth had never been powerful merely because it existed. It required a room willing to hear it. I will attend, Beatrice said. Mrs. Whitmore turned from the window. Yes. I thought you would. You do not advise against it. I advise fear to take a chair and wait while you dress. The words were brisk, but her eyes were kind. Beatrice drew a slow breath. Lady Prudence will not come unprepared. Nor shall we. Mrs. Whitmore crossed to the table and lifted the dance card. She opened the ivory cover and looked again at the small violet sentence that had begun everything. Reserved for pity. The handwriting is younger here than in the draft. Careless. Pleased with itself. Cecily. Yes. She brought the card closer to the window, then frowned. Where is the little ink case you mentioned? Cecily carries it on her reticule. Violet enamel with a silver clasp. Did she bring it to the dinner? Yes. It hung beside her work basket the morning after. She used it on the place cards. Mrs. Whitmore held the dance card beside the place card. The ink is not merely similar. It dries with the same bluish edge. See there, where the stroke thickens. Beatrice looked. She had noticed the color before, but not that delicate rim at the end of each line. I see it. Good. Remember it. Rooms like Lady Penhurst's prefer details that sound too small to be invented. Beatrice sat and began arranging the papers in order. First the dance card. Then the note. Then the draft. And the accounts. Only if Lady Prudence attempts to call me unstable or dishonest. Mrs. Whitmore's gaze sharpened. She will. She must make your character the subject before her own conduct becomes one. Beatrice's fingers stilled. Then the accounts must come. The thought of exposing Sir Edmund's debt still wounded her. Not because he had earned protection. Because she had spent half her life giving it. My father will be there. Yes. He may say nothing. Then his silence will have an audience. Beatrice folded her hands to stop them from trembling. I do not want to destroy him. Mrs. Whitmore sat across from her. Child, a truth that finally reaches daylight is not destruction. It is consequence. There is a difference, though cowards often pretend otherwise. A knock came below. This one Beatrice recognized before the maid entered. Not theatrical like Lord Alistair's. Not official like Lady Penhurst's footman. Measured. Restrained. The maid appeared with a card. His Grace the Duke of Ellsmere. Mrs. Whitmore glanced at Beatrice. Shall I send him away? Beatrice looked at the invitation, then at the apology folded near the edge of the table. No. Please admit him. Sebastian entered a few moments later, bringing with him the air of a man who had decided what must be done and was trying, with visible effort, not to do all of it himself. He bowed to Mrs. Whitmore, then to Beatrice. His gaze moved to the papers arranged on the table. He did not touch them. That restraint mattered. Lady Penhurst has written, Beatrice said. I know. She wrote to me as well. Then you know we are expected this afternoon. Yes. Mrs. Whitmore pointed to a chair with her cane. Sit, Your Grace. Standing over evidence makes even honest men look like prosecutors. Sebastian obeyed with something very close to humility. I have arranged a carriage for Miss Vale, if she wishes to use it. Mrs. Whitmore, you would accompany her, of course. My solicitor has prepared a memorandum concerning the note, the wax trace, the handwriting comparison, and the accounts. It is concise. It need not be read unless required. Beatrice listened to the careful order of his words. If she had heard them a week ago, she might have mistaken them for command. Now she heard the spaces where he had left room for refusal. You have prepared everything. Everything I could prepare without deciding for you. She met his eyes. And if I choose not to use your carriage, then mine will follow at a distance to ensure yours arrives without interference. Mrs. Whitmore gave a dry little sound. Accept the carriage, Beatrice. Pride need not hire inferior horses. Despite the pressure in her chest, Beatrice almost smiled. Very well. Sebastian's shoulders eased by a fraction. There is one more matter. He reached inside his coat and withdrew the ivory-covered dance card. Beatrice stared at it. How did you come by that? Mrs. Whitmore lifted one eyebrow. I gave it to him for half an hour. Do not look betrayed. I was supervising his usefulness. Sebastian placed the card on the table between them. I asked Mrs. Whitmore's permission to examine it beside the original note and the place card. The ink match is stronger than I expected. Will it be enough? Beatrice asked. Enough to make denial difficult. Not impossible. Lady Prudence has lived on difficult denial. Then we shall not rely upon ink alone. His hand rested near the card, but still he did not touch it once it belonged to her sight again. I wanted to return this before we go. Beatrice looked at the little ivory cover. It had held her humiliation. It had drawn the Duke's notice. It had become evidence, then burden, then something too complicated for one name. I do not know whether I hate it. You are entitled to. It is foolish to hate an object. No. It is human. His voice lowered. You may keep it, burn it, or let it condemn them. It is yours. The sentence entered her with unexpected force. It is yours. Not the family's. Not society's. Not his. Beatrice picked up the card and held it in her palm. For the first time since the ball, it did not feel like a trap. It felt like a witness waiting to be called. Then I will take it with me. Sebastian inclined his head. As you wish. A silence followed, not empty, but charged with all that could not yet be said. Mrs. Whitmore busied herself with the papers and gave them the mercy of pretending distraction. Beatrice looked at Sebastian. When we arrive, Lady Prudence will try to speak first. Lady Penhurst may permit it. No, the word surprised even her with its steadiness. I will begin. Sebastian's eyes held hers. Then I will make certain you are not interrupted. Not unless I ask you. He paused. Then, quietly, not unless you ask me. The promise did more to steady her than any grander vow could have done. An hour later, Beatrice dressed in dark green wool, plain but well cut, with her mother's blue shawl folded over her arm. Mrs. Whitmore fastened her gloves and tucked the solicitor's memorandum into a leather case. The forged note, the torn draft, the place card, the copied accounts, and the ivory-covered dance card lay inside in careful order. Outside, Sebastian's carriage waited, crest discreet on the door. The afternoon had turned cold, and a thin mist blurred the square as if London itself wished to soften what was coming. Beatrice stepped into the carriage with Mrs. Whitmore beside her. Sebastian followed in his own, as propriety required. No one spoke much on the way. There was nothing left to rehearse that fear had not already repeated. At Lady Penhurst's house, the steps were spotless, the brass shining, the windows blank and formal. Carriages already lined the street. Beatrice saw the Vale carriage near the corner. Her pulse did not race. It deepened, heavy and deliberate. Mrs. Whitmore touched her wrist once. Straight enough to frighten them, remember. Beatrice looked at the door. Yes. Inside, a footman took their names. Voices murmured beyond the drawing room. Lady Prudence's smooth tone. Cecily's softer one. Lord Alastair's practiced confidence. Sir Edmund's silence, audible even through wood. Sebastian came to stand a proper distance behind Beatrice, close enough that she knew he was there, far enough that no one could say he guided her steps. The leather case rested in her hand. The dance card rested inside it. She had walked in 2 rooms before as a daughter, a sister, a convenience, a disappointment, and a warning to younger women not to wait too long. This time, she walked in as herself. The doors of Lady Penhurst's drawing room opened. Lady Penhurst's drawing room did not look like a place where reputations ended. It looked gentle, almost kind, with pale green walls, porcelain shepherdesses on the mantel, and a fire arranged for comfort rather than drama. That made it worse. Rooms with carved chairs and painted screens could do more damage than courtrooms because no one inside them had to admit they were passing judgment. Beatrice stepped over the threshold with Mrs. Whitmore beside her and the leather case in her gloved hand. Sebastian remained a proper distance behind, close enough to be seen as support, not close enough to claim her voice. Lady Penhurst sat near the hearth, a thin woman in black silk with silver hair and eyes that had outlived several scandals without being softened by any of them. Sir Edmund stood near a window, pale and visibly diminished. Lady Prudence occupied the sofa with Cecily at her side, one hand resting protectively over her daughter's. Lord Alastair Fenwick stood near the tea table, grave and handsome, as if he had been invited to mourn rather than participate. 2 other senior ladies sat nearby, not speaking, not knitting, not missing a breath. Lady Penhurst extended her hand. Miss Vale. Mrs. Whitmore. Your Grace. Each name was given equal weight. Beatrice noticed. So did Lady Prudence. Thank you for coming, Lady Penhurst continued. It is an unpleasant matter, and unpleasant matters become worse when left to servants, corridors, and opera boxes. Lady Prudence lowered her eyes. No one regrets that more than I do. My poor stepdaughter has suffered from excessive attention, and I fear disappointment has unsettled her judgment. There it was. Not accusation first. Pity. Pity was safer because it made cruelty sound like concern. Beatrice felt the old reflex rise. Smooth the room. Spare Papa. Let Prudence finish. Apologize for being inconvenient. Then she felt the weight of the leather case in her hand. Lady Penhurst, she said, may I speak before my condition is described by someone else? The room stilled. Lady Prudence's fingers tightened over Cecily's. Lady Penhurst studied Beatrice for one measured second. Yes. You may. Beatrice moved to the small table near the center of the room. Her heart beat hard, but her hands remained steady as she opened the case. She took out the ivory-covered dance card and placed it on the polished surface. It made almost no sound. Yet every face turned toward it. This is where the lie began. Cecily went pale. Not dramatically. The color simply left her cheeks, like water draining from porcelain. Lady Prudence gave a soft, wounded laugh. Beatrice, dear, must we begin with a trinket from a ball? You were embarrassed, I know, but one mustn't turn a foolish private jest into an accusation. It was not private, Beatrice said. It was written where it could be discovered. It was written inside my dance card at Lady Bramwell's ball, after my family mocked the fact that no gentleman had asked me to dance. Lord Alastair shifted. Miss Vale, no one here wishes to revisit your disappointments. Sebastian's voice cut in, quiet and absolute. Let her speak. The 3 words changed the room. Not because they were loud. They were not. They carried rank, but more than rank, they carried decision. Lord Alastair closed his mouth. Beatrice did not look back at Sebastian. If she did, she might borrow strength from him when she needed to prove she had brought her own. She opened the dance card. The words written here are, reserved for pity. One of the older ladies drew a breath. Lady Penhurst did not move. Cecily looked down at her lap. Beatrice set the card flat and continued. I did not show this to anyone at the ball. His Grace saw it only because the card fell and he returned it to me. That same night, he asked me to dance. That should have been the end of it. Instead, a second lie was created to make his courtesy appear as my delusion. She placed the forged note beside the card. The paper looked obscene in the civilized room. This note was circulated at the opera. It claims I wrote privately to His Grace, begging for a sign of affection and imagining that he had encouraged me. Lady Prudence touched a handkerchief to her mouth. It was painful for all of us. Beatrice looked at her. No. It was useful for some of you. Sir Edmund flinched. Lady Penhurst's gaze sharpened. Miss Vale, do you deny writing the note? Entirely. And you can support that denial? Yes. Beatrice placed the dinner place card beside the note. The ink is violet. The hand attempts to imitate mine, but several letters follow my sister's habits. The same ink appears on this place card from Lady Prudence's dinner. Miss Cecily corrected it herself while His Grace was present. Cecily's head lifted. Lots of ladies use violet ink. Her voice trembled, then steadied into the sweetness she used when she wished to be rescued. I don't know why Beatrice wants to make me wicked. I only ever tried to help her feel included. Beatrice turned to her sister fully. The question had lived in her since the ballroom, but until this moment, it had been too painful to give words. Why did my loneliness offend you so much? The room fell silent. Cecily stared as if Beatrice had struck a bell beside her ear. It didn't. Then why write pity into it? I didn't. The denial came too quickly. Beatrice took out the torn draft from the sewing basket. Cecily's eyes fixed upon it. Lady Prudence's hand moved once, then stopped. This was found in your sewing basket, Beatrice said. It contains phrases from the opera note. Some lines are in a younger, decorative hand. Some corrections are in a firmer one. Lady Penhurst leaned forward. May I see it? Beatrice carried it to her. The older woman accepted the paper, read, then passed it to one of the senior ladies. The silence lengthened, but it was no longer the silence that had buried Beatrice for years. It was listening silence. That difference almost undid her. Lady Prudence rose slowly. This is grotesque. My stepdaughter rummaged through Cecily's private things, misunderstood innocent scraps, and now wishes to punish us because His Grace's notice has disturbed her sense of proportion. Mrs. Whitmore's cane touched the floor. Careful, Lady Prudence. Some of us remember when your concern sounded exactly like ambition. Lady Prudence ignored her. Her eye shone with offended motherhood. Cecily is young. She is impressionable. Beatrice has always been cleverer, sharper, more resentful than people realize. She has lived for years in disappointment. Must we pretend that has left no mark? Beatrice felt the sentence land where it was meant to land. Years unmarried. Years useful. Years unseen. All turned into evidence against her. She steadied herself with one breath. My disappointment is not a crime. No, Lady Prudence said softly. But bitterness can become one. Sebastian moved slightly. Beatrice lifted one hand without looking at him. Not yet. He stopped. She loved him a little for stopping, though the thought had no place in such a room. Lady Penhurst looked from the draft to the dance card. Miss Cecily, did you write inside your sister's dance card? Cecily's eyes filled at once. I don't remember. Lady Penhurst's voice cooled. That was not the question. Lord Alastair stepped forward with a sympathetic bow. Lady Penhurst, surely we are losing sight of the practical solution. Miss Vale's reputation has suffered. I have already indicated my willingness to offer her my name, despite the unfortunate speculation surrounding the Duke. Beatrice almost smiled. It was the wrong response, and perhaps the truest one. You offered me my silence in exchange for your name. Alastair's expression hardened. I offered protection. You offered ownership. Lady Penhurst turned her eyes to him. Lord Alastair, you will not interrupt again unless addressed. His face flushed. Sebastian said nothing. He did not need to. Beatrice returned to the table and placed her hand beside the dance card. I was mocked because I had no dances. Then I was mocked because a duke asked me for one. When I was silent, I was pitied. When I answered, I was called unstable. When I left Lyndhurst House, I was said to have fled in shame. I did not flee from shame. I left because I would no longer live where truth was treated as a greater danger than cruelty. Sir Edmund made a broken sound. Beatrice. She turned to him then. His eyes were wet, his face grey. For one moment, she saw the father who had loved her mother, the father who had once carried her across wet grass, the father who had disappeared one compromise at a time. Papa, she said, and her voice softened despite everything. You knew I was unhappy. He closed his eyes. Yes. Lady Prudence turned sharply. Edmund. He opened them again, but did not look at his wife. I knew she was unhappy. The admission moved through the room like a curtain lifting. Lady Prudence saw it and changed at once. The injured mother vanished. The strategist remained. If we are speaking of truth, she said, then let us speak of all of it. Beatrice did not leave merely from wounded dignity. She left because certain irregularities in household funds would soon be discovered, and she had managed those accounts for years. Beatrice went cold. Cecily stared at her mother. Lord Alastair's confidence returned by inches. Lady Prudence lifted her chin, sorrowful and severe. I did not wish to say it. But if Miss Vale insists on accusing this family, then she must answer why money entrusted to her care has disappeared. The accusation did what Lady Prudence intended. It changed the shape of the room before anyone could test whether it was true. Two of the senior ladies looked toward Beatrice, not with belief yet, but with the instinctive caution society reserved for money, reputation, and unmarried women accused by respectable households. Sir Edmund seemed to shrink where he stood. Cecily stared at her mother with frightened confusion, as if the game had suddenly reached a depth she had not known was beneath her feet. Beatrice felt the old trap close. Not because she feared the account books. She knew what they contained. She feared the ease with which a room could be persuaded to examine her character while stepping around the hands that had bruised it. Lady Prudence saw the pause and pressed it. For years, Beatrice has handled correspondence with tradesmen, charitable subscriptions, and household payments. She has had access to every ledger. Funds meant for proper accounts have vanished or been delayed. I did not wish to speak of this, but her behavior has grown increasingly erratic. Erratic, Mrs. Whitmore said, and the word in her mouth sounded like a pin being removed from a cushion. How tidy. When a woman will not be silent, call her unsettled. When she has figures, call her dishonest. Lady Penhurst lifted one hand. Mrs. Whitmore. The older woman subsided, but her eyes did not soften. Beatrice opened the leather case. Her fingers were steady now in a way that felt almost separate from her body. Lady Penhurst, may I answer with the accounts? You may. Lady Prudence's gaze flickered toward the case. For the first time that afternoon, she looked less certain. These are copied pages, Beatrice said, placing them on the table. I copied them before leaving Lyndhurst House because I feared exactly this. The household funds were not stolen by me. They were stretched, delayed, and concealed to preserve appearances. The dressmaker for Miss Cecily's presentation gown has not been fully paid. The wine merchant has waited 8 months. The coal account was delayed twice. There are sums borrowed against expectations that were never secure. Sir Edmund whispered, Beatrice. She looked at him. Is any of that false, Papa? His mouth moved. No sound came. Lady Prudence rose. Edmund, you needn't dignify this. Sebastian stepped forward at last. He did not stand before Beatrice. He stood beside the table, where his presence made interruption harder but did not steal the evidence from her hand. Lady Penhurst, he said, I have a memorandum prepared by Mr. Abel Wicks, solicitor, concerning the documents Miss Vale has shown. He examined the copied accounts this morning against bills provided by 3 tradesmen willing to confirm the debts privately. The funds Lady Prudence calls missing correspond to expenses for Miss Cecily's gowns, presentation fees, carriage repairs, and Sir Edmund's gaming debts at White's. The word gaming moved through the room with more force than a shout. Sir Edmund closed his eyes. Lady Prudence's face flushed, then cooled. A solicitor retained by your grace would naturally favour your preferred conclusion. Mr. Wicks is not retained to flatter me, Sebastian said. And I am not in the habit of requiring assistance to know when a lie is poorly built. Lord Alistair gave a strained laugh. Surely this has become excessive. No one means to expose Sir Edmund. You did, Beatrice said. Alistair looked at her sharply. I beg your pardon. You came to Mrs. Whitmore's house and offered marriage if I would remain silent. You knew silence had value because Lady Prudence had already told you what it would hide. That's an outrageous interpretation. It's an accurate one, Sebastian said. Your creditors may find it interesting that you intended to settle your future by attaching yourself to a woman you believed frightened enough to be grateful. Alistair's colour deepened. Your Grace, I don't answer to gossip. No, Sebastian replied. You answer to invitations. You will receive none from House of Arden. The sentence was quiet. It ended something. Alistair understood before anyone else did. His charm vanished, leaving a man suddenly aware that doors he had counted on were closing. Lady Penhurst turned to Sir Edmund. Sir Edmund, did Miss Vale steal household funds? The question offered him one last shelter or one last duty. Beatrice watched him with a sorrow so old it had almost become tenderness. Sir Edmund looked at Lady Prudence, then at Cecily, then at the daughter he had allowed to become the wall between his weakness and the world. His voice shook. No. She did not. Lady Prudence made a sharp sound. Edmund. No, he said again, and the second time there was more man in it. Beatrice did not steal. She kept the accounts from collapsing because I would not look at them. She answered letters I was ashamed to open. She delayed what could be delayed. She protected my name when I did not protect hers. Beatrice felt the words land, not as healing yet, but as truth. Truth was not soft. It was weight removed from the wrong shoulders and placed where it belonged. Cecily began to cry then, but not prettily. Her face crumpled with panic. I didn't mean for all of this to happen. Lady Prudence turned on her. Cecily, be quiet. No, Cecily looked at Beatrice, then at the dance card still lying open on the table. I only wrote the first thing. In the card. Mamma said it would be a joke. She said Beatrice never cared what people thought. Her voice broke. I was angry because he looked at her. Everyone always said she was past all that, and then he looked at her as if she mattered. The room became terribly still. Beatrice could not speak. That was the smallest and cruelest truth of all. Not hatred. Not strategy. A younger sister had been trained to believe that one woman's worth required another woman's disappearance. Lady Prudence's expression hardened. Cecily is overwrought. I'm not, Cecily whispered. You told me what to write in the note. I copied it, but you changed the lines. You said if people thought Beatrice had chased him, he would step away. Lady Prudence's hand struck the back of the sofa, not violently, but with enough force to make Cecily flinch. Ungrateful child. Lady Penhurst rose. She was not tall, yet everyone in the room seemed lower when she stood. Enough. One word. It carried years of dinners, assemblies, introductions, refusals, and the invisible machinery by which society decided who belonged. Lady Prudence faced her, breathing quickly. Lady Penhurst, you cannot mean to credit hysterics and copied scraps over a mother protecting her family. I credit conduct, Lady Penhurst said. I credit evidence. I credit Sir Edmund's admission. I credit Miss Cecily's confession, however late. And I credit Miss Vale's restraint in a room where restraint has been used against her. She looked toward the two senior ladies. Neither disagreed. That silence was verdict enough. Lady Penhurst continued, Lady Prudence, I shall not receive you again this season. Nor shall I encourage my friends to place their daughters where such instruction is considered maternal guidance. Lady Prudence went white. You would ruin Cecily for this. No. You have injured Cecily yourself. I shall advise that she leave London for a quieter household until she learns whether conscience can survive ambition. Cecily covered her mouth with both hands. Beatrice felt no triumph. Only sadness, and beneath it, relief so deep it frightened her. Lady Penhurst turned to Lord Alistair. As for you, my lord, a gentleman who offers marriage as a price for silence should consider himself fortunate if silence is all society grants him in return. Alistair bowed stiffly, defeated by the fact that no one looked at him with interest anymore. Lady Prudence sat down slowly, as if her bones had remembered gravity. Sir Edmund took one step toward Beatrice. My dear, she lifted a hand. Not cruelly. Enough. Not now, Papa. He stopped. For once, he obeyed a boundary she had set. Sebastian had been silent through the consequences, his face controlled but not cold. Now he turned toward Beatrice in front of them all. Whatever remained of the room's attention followed him. Miss Vale, he said, I owe you more than assistance. I owe you truth. Beatrice looked at him. Her heart, exhausted by justice, found one last beat of fear. At the opera, I wronged you when I asked whether the lie was yours before asking who had profited from it. I thought first of action, not of the wound my question would make. I'm sorry. The apology was not grand. It did not ask the room to admire him. It did not turn her pain into his performance. It stood before witnesses and accepted its own weight. Beatrice breathed in slowly. Thank you, Your Grace. Lady Penhurst's expression softened for the first time. Mrs. Whitmore looked suspiciously toward the window. Sebastian inclined his head. I would ask permission to call tomorrow, if Mrs. Whitmore approves, and if you wish it. Not because scandal requires repair. Not because my name has been entangled with yours. Because I would like to know you better, properly, and without asking society to speak first. Beatrice looked at the dance card on the table, the forged note, the torn draft, the accounts, and the people who had each tried to define what she was. Useless. Useful. Pitiable. Unstable. Grateful. Guilty. None of those names held her now. You may call tomorrow, she said. I will decide after tea. For one suspended second, Sebastian's composure almost broke into something warmer. Then I shall endeavour to make tea tolerable. Mrs. Whitmore sniffed. Begin by arriving on time. A faint ripple of relief moved through the room, fragile but real. Beatrice gathered the ivory-covered dance card and closed it. The little sentence remained inside, but it no longer had the last word. Lady Penhurst watched her do it and nodded once, as if a judgment far older than gossip had been satisfied. Beatrice left the drawing-room with Mrs. Whitmore at her side and Sebastian a proper step behind, while Lady Prudence remained seated among the ruins of her own politeness. Outside, the afternoon mist had lifted. London was still watching. This time, Beatrice did not lower her eyes. 3 months after Lady Penhurst closed her drawing-room against Lady Prudence Vale, London learned that a woman could be vindicated without becoming loud. Beatrice did not return to Lyndhurst House. That was the first fact society tried to soften, then explain, then finally accept. She remained with Mrs. Whitmore in Bloomsbury, where morning callers found her composed, simply dressed, and no longer positioned near the edge of any room as if waiting to be useful. The first week, visitors came from curiosity. By the fourth, they came because Lady Penhurst had received her, because the Duke of Ellsmere had called with perfect propriety every Tuesday and Friday, and because there is no education more efficient than watching a woman once pitted become impossible to dismiss. Sebastian arrived always at the appointed hour. At first, he brought books Mrs. Whitmore accused him of choosing too severely. Then he brought music, a new set of slates for the Marylebone schoolroom, and once, a small packet of violets tied with grey ribbon, which made Beatrice raise one eyebrow until he said, I thought it time the colour learned better manners. She laughed then. Not politely. Not because anyone required brightness from her. The sound had surprised them both, and Mrs. Whitmore had looked into the fire as if she had not seen the Duke of Ellsmere lose his place in the conversation for the first time in his life. Their courtship became the quiet subject of London, though it offered very little spectacle. They walked in the park with Mrs. Whitmore several paces behind, who declared she was not a chaperone so much as a warning system. They attended 2 afternoon musicales, where Sebastian asked for Beatrice's opinion before giving his own. He sent no extravagant jewels. He made no grand announcements. Instead, he learned how she took her tea, which composers made her thoughtful, which charities had been ignored because no one fashionable could be seen improving them, and how often she still stopped herself before speaking, as if years of correction had left invisible hands at her throat. Whenever that happened, he waited. He did not fill the silence. He let her return to herself. Beatrice noticed. She noticed everything now. So Edmund wrote after the first month. The letter arrived on a wet morning, thick with regret and blotted in places where his hand had paused too long. He admitted cowardice without adorning it. He wrote that Lady Prudence had gone to relatives in Kent and that Cecily had been sent to Bath under the care of an aunt who valued plain speech more than ribbons. He wrote that the house felt hollow without Beatrice's step. He wrote, at last, that he had mistaken her endurance for contentment because believing otherwise would have required courage. Beatrice read the letter twice, then folded it. She did not weep over it. Tears, she had discovered, were not always the measure of love or forgiveness. Sometimes the deepest change was that a wound could be touched without reopening. Her reply was kind and brief. She wished him health. She thanked him for the truth. She did not promise to return. When Sebastian arrived that afternoon and saw the letter beside her work basket, he asked only, "Did it cost you peace?" Beatrice considered. No. It asked for what it could not have, but it did not take anything. He nodded, as if that answer mattered more than all of Sir Edmund's rank and regrets. By early autumn, London had grown tired of the scandal because London preferred fresh sins, but Beatrice did not mistake forgetting for healing. The difference was choice. She had not been restored to the old place with kinder words painted on the walls. She had stepped into a different life. The Marylebone schoolroom had its slates, a repaired stove, and a mistress whose salary no longer depended upon exhausted mothers paying pennies they could not spare. Mrs. Whitmore had begun telling people Beatrice had a gift for making good works inconvenient to ignore. Sebastian said little when others praised her. His silence then was not neglect. It was pride held with such restraint that only Beatrice could read it. The invitation to Harrowmere Park came at the end of September, written formally to Mrs. Whitmore and including every propriety society could demand. Lady Penhurst herself approved the visit, which meant no one sensible objected. Beatrice had heard of the estate, of course. Harrowmere Park lay in Hampshire, broad and old, with beech woods, pale stone terraces, and a music room built by some ardent duchess who had loved Italian singers and English rain in equal measure. Yet when Beatrice first stepped inside, she was struck less by grandeur than by quiet. The house did not strain to impress. It endured. Sebastian watched her from the foot of the staircase as the housekeeper greeted Mrs. Whitmore. "You are frowning," he said. "I am deciding whether your ancestors were severe or merely expensive." "Both, I suspect." "How honest of you." "I'm trying to make a favorable impression." "Then you should know honesty is improving your case." His mouth softened. "I shall remember that." They spent the afternoon properly, with Mrs. Whitmore resting in the morning room and the housekeeper present whenever custom required another pair of eyes. Beatrice saw the library, the terrace, the chapel, and the long gallery where portraits of Arden stared down with the self-importance of people who had never needed to wonder whether they belonged. Yet Sebastian did not linger there. Near sunset, he brought her to the music room. It faced west, and the fading light entered through tall windows, warming the polished floor and the ivory keys of the pianoforte. On the stand lay the waltz she had once mentioned at Lyndhurst House, the quiet piece that did not ask to be admired. Beside it rested her ivory-covered dance card. Beatrice stopped just inside the doorway. "You kept it here." "Only today. Mrs. Whitmore brought it with your permission." "She did not mention that. She said surprise was healthy when administered by competent hands." Beatrice looked at the card. The insult remained inside. She knew it without opening it. Yet here, in this room, beside music and autumn light, the object seemed smaller than it had been. Not powerless, exactly. Transformed. "I used to think that card proved no one wanted me," she said. Sebastian stood a few feet away, not crowding her, never crowding her. It proved only that the wrong people had been permitted to write first. She turned toward him. There was no audience. No Lady Penhurst, no Lady Prudence, no watching ballroom, no whispering opera boxes. Only the warm floor, the music, the quiet house, and a man who had learned that love could not be commanded if it wished to be trusted. Sebastian took a small breath. It was the least composed she had ever seen him. Beatrice, I have asked you to dance before a room because I wished them to see what they had refused to see. I have stood beside you while truth was spoken because you deserved witnesses. But today I ask for something that requires no witnesses at all. Her heart became very still. He did not kneel dramatically. He did not turn the moment into theatre. He took one step closer and held out his hand, palm open, asking before touching. Will you marry me because you choose to, not because the room is watching? For a moment, all the years behind her gathered in silence. The empty edges of ballrooms. The usefulness. The pity. The careful cruelties. Then they loosened. They did not vanish. They simply ceased to lead her? Beatrice placed her hand in his. Yes, she said. But you should know I intend to keep choosing after today. His fingers closed around hers with reverent care. I would not dare marry you if you didn't. She laughed softly, and the sound trembled into tears she did not hide. Sebastian lifted her hand and bowed over it, not as a duke granting honor, but as a man receiving it. May I have this dance, Miss Vale? You may, Your Grace. Sebastian, he corrected, very quietly. Sebastian, she said, and his name felt less like rank than home. There was no orchestra, so he hummed the first notes badly enough that Beatrice had to rescue the rhythm. They moved slowly across the music room, not with the dazzling precision of a Mayfair ballroom, but with something better. Trust. Mrs. Whitmore, who had undoubtedly positioned herself in the corridor for propriety and sentiment in equal measure, was heard to mutter, at least he can apologize and count time. Many husbands manage neither. Beatrice smiled against Sebastian's shoulder without leaning too close. She approves. Does she? For Mrs. Whitmore, that was practically a blessing. The last light faded. When the dance ended, Sebastian took the ivory-covered card and opened the small music box on the pianoforte. Inside lay the blue ribbon from Beatrice's mother's letters, placed there with her permission. Beatrice set the dance card beside it herself. Not hidden. Not displayed. Kept. The words inside no longer commanded the memory. They belonged to the beginning, not the end. Years later, when people spoke of the Duchess of Ellsmere, they remembered her intelligence, her calm authority, the schoolrooms she funded, the women she refused to let society misname, and the way the Duke listened when she spoke. But Beatrice remembered the music room most clearly. She remembered the quiet after applause was no longer needed. She remembered the man who asked, not claimed. She remembered placing the ivory-covered dance card into the music box at Harrowmere Park, no longer a record of pity, but the first page of the life she had chosen for herself.